Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. For joining us for today's AIAA Los Angeles Las Vegas section online webinar. Today we have two amazing speakers. Uh, on two very exciting topics, and we have been, it's coming from a long way. So enjoy today's event, and please ask questions. And at the end of the event, the talks. We'll be able to. The speaker will be able to take your question at the time. Okay, so this is our tentative schedule. Unfortunately, our section chair, Dr. Chandrasekhar Sawane, he has been focusing on the lunar lander project recently, so he was not able to join us at least right now. If he joins us shortly, we'll ask him to say a few words. So he asked me to say a few words on his behalf to welcome everyone. At 10:10, we'll have around 10:10. We'll have the Mr. Steve Lee from AIAA talking about aerospace cybersecurity, and around 11:40, this is a Pacific time. Dr. Harold, Dr. White, we're going to talk about go incredibly fast on the advanced propulsion. We can be a little bit flexible, but that's the general timeline. We'll try to follow it. Okay, so just a quick note, if we welcome volunteers, so if you are interested, you can contact me, or also our section chair with the Gmail listed there. You can see those information on the event notice as well. Let me do this, it's probably easier. Okay, so if anything happened to the Zoom session, please keep trying to reconnect. Sometimes that's due to the bandwidth of the internet, but it generally should not be a problem. But if anything happens, please keep trying. And please type your question in the Q&A or raise hands to be unmuted. Try not to put in the chat room because it will be hard to see. For us and for the speakers, but we'll do our best. And our upcoming event is on the link AIAA-LV.org/events, and our membership program is AIAA.org/membership. And we are running a special you can see on the top of the page. It's called eMember. Before you join the professional membership, it's free for 1 year trial. If you have never been a member before, it's AIAA.org/eMember. Okay, so this is the logistic for the Zoom. If anything that you feel that your internet speed is slow, you can try to just dial in, or just turn off the audio or video shortly and wait for the speed to pick up. If any question, you can put in the chat room, or you can text me at the phone number below. If any issues. So just a few words about Southern California, which is a very special area. There are a lot of aerospace companies here and efforts, and a lot of experts. Formerly, the Apollo project, the Apollo lunar module was built in Downey, California, and the space shuttle program. And we have Hughes, North American Aviation, Northrop Grumman, so TRW. So historically, this area has been blessed with aerospace activity. Of course, we have the Douglas, Mr. Douglas, aircraft, and McDonnell Douglas as well. But we also have people, building the space telescope, James Webb Space Telescope, and the scientists studying exoplanet astrophysics, and the people in defense and the Mars exploration, and the asteroid, near-Earth objects, space debris, the planetary defense. And we have people doing space tourism, Virgin Galactic, and we have the satellite launch and the rocket development. SpaceX, as you know, is right next to us. And we have students doing great job, or a student project like USC student. They do launch student rocket into space, passing common line for the first time for students. And that's all thanks to our wonderful council member, of course, general member and the community as well. But our council member, we are volunteers, we are not paid, and we do this for the service to the community. And right now, our section chair is Dr. Chandrasekhar Sawane, And we have several advisors and great council members, and such as Dr. Jeffrey Pushel from Raytheon, he's our AIAA fellow. Then we have Marty Waldman in the Las Vegas section developing membership and AIAA program over there. So really, and we have Bob Frank, Marsha, and everyone, Lisa, Marilyn. It's a great team. And if you join AIAA, you can start to enjoy the Engage website and the discussion room. You can immediately chat with 30,000 or even more AIAA member expert globally. And so it's a great feature, very easy to use, very good, very nice. And so locally, we do a lot of events to match the headquarters AIAA national office effort. So it's just to keep people interested and develop, and we can develop the AIAA membership. So we won't go too much longer in this, but if you join the professional society, you get the great advantage, knowing where the resources, develop your career, and a journal, events, information, networking. And AIAA is a national organization with headquarters in Reston, Virginia. And we are the local chapter in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, which is based in El Segundo. Okay, different level of membership. If you log on to the website, you will see different level. The educator membership is free as well. And the student will enjoy the transition membership to professional membership with great discount. There's some contact of our local chapter. And our first speaker today is Mr. Steve Lee. He is our Aerospace Cybersecurity Program Manager. He's in charge of the AIAA effort in the Aerospace Cybersecurity. He leads the new Aerospace Cybersecurity Program at the AIAA with the goal of integrating cybersecurity and aerospace into aerospace discipline and practice. This is very important. A lot of young students are asking, should they learn computer, mechanical engineering, how do we do this? You cannot imagine this is so important for people's career as well. He's currently focusing his unique combination of cyber protection and the strategy experience in industry and in the federal policy arena to build the AIAA Aerospace Cybersecurity Program. He has a keen eye for adapting organization policies and the people to new security and technology challenges, as demonstrated by his successful leadership of cyber and regulatory compliance project in industry. He also coordinated business and talent strategy efforts to grow and sustain a Fortune 500 consulting company's world-class cyber workforce. He previously provided senior-level expertise on physical and cyber infrastructure protection and the intelligence program policy for client engagement at the Department of Homeland Security, including analysis of threats to dams, energy, rail, transit, and other critical infrastructure, basically protecting us. It's very important. He has over 25 years of program management, critical infrastructure protection, and the national security experience, including over 6 years supporting DHS and the intelligence community, and the analysis of cyber terrorism and weapons of mass destruction issues, and nearly 5 years in the U.S. Army. He also served in leadership and the sales role in aviation and media organizations. So let's welcome Mr. Steve Lee from our AIAA headquarters.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Ken. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to talking to you here today and taking your questions and having a dialogue here. Let me give you just a little brief kind of introduction of where this all started with AIAA. AIAA first kind of gotten interested in cybersecurity around 2013. They published a paper on cybersecurity in particularly in the aviation area around then. And the board of trustees decided at that point that they wanted to start including cybersecurity in AIAA's programming. And that proceeded in kind of fits and starts. In that time, there was some different programming. There was also the formation of something called the Aerospace Cybersecurity Working Group, which is not a full-up technical committee within AIAA, but it was kind of the gathering place um, for members and kind of friendly to the topic issue individuals to, to kind of connect and make some things happen. And that also, has had moments of high activity and then some periods of dormancy as well. But around this time last year, however, the AIAA Board of Trustees decided to kind of really commit to building the program, and that was around the time I entered the picture. They hired me almost a year ago, last November, with the charge of forming this particular program. As Ken mentioned, I've been out in industry previously doing cybersecurity work, and one of the kind of the themes here that you'll hear me return to a couple of times as I talk about all of this is that other industries have gone from doing little or no cybersecurity to really being focused on it in short periods of time. I've worked with those industries, and that's some experience that I hope to leverage as we get this program going, and as this program starts to bear fruit, and not to get too not to get too grandiose or big, but the changes that we want to make in our programming, we hope will be changes that ultimately benefit the entire aerospace community. So without any further ado, let's start talking about this a little bit. Ken, can you advance to the next slide, please? Thank you. So why are we paying attention to this? Why the interest in cybersecurity? So it's not just our board of trustees that thinks thinks that cybersecurity is interesting or important. We've got some other really notable indications here as well. There's a lot of what I would just characterize as real world events driving a lot of the interest in this and the need to have this program. And I'm going to give you at least one tangible, tangible, numerically driven, quantitative figure about why or how this is important. And that is, many of you, if you're AIAA members, you might be familiar with our daily launch, daily news email. And this is a kind of a roundup of significant news developments from all around the world on different aerospace topics, including the latest developments with the major space programs, the latest developments with fielding and deployment of new aircraft, any of the news around aviation safety, gets in there. When something has been launched, from a satellite or a new probe has been launched. All that stuff comes out every day in our daily launch newsletter, and we added a cybersecurity section to it, and we were able to place and find relevant stories that have a nexus between cybersecurity and aerospace. We're able to, since the beginning of the year when we started doing that, we were able to put cybersecurity stories, at least one, if not up to maybe 4 or 5 at a time, every day for pretty much the past year. So it's over 98%. So if you read the daily launch, it's probably about 2/3 of the way down. There's an aerospace cybersecurity section, and there's a pretty steady flow of information coming out from day to day about some development or another regarding cybersecurity and aerospace. So there's a lot of attention focused out there in the real world as well. But we've also done some other quantitative research among the membership and among adjacent communities, which is to say people who could be members or might be members or who aren't members, but they certainly respect and pay attention to things that are happening in AIAA. And Edge Research did some of that work for us. And we have a variety of measures of feedback or of opinion and and views from, from research that shows that many, overwhelmingly, I want to say that it's consistently well over 2/3 and up to 3/4 and, touching 80%, different measures of concern about cybersecurity in aerospace. So there's certainly among AIAA's membership and adjacent communities, there's a lot of concern about cybersecurity and how cybersecurity impacts space and aviation operations. And then the other thing that's probably not as it's not as statistically valid, but it's certainly important. Anecdotes are feedback that I've gotten. SciTech, for example, that we put on last January down in Florida before we locked down for COVID. I got an incredible amount of feedback about from unexpected places and kind of spontaneously, that there is strong concern about cybersecurity in aerospace. So, and in particular, there's a lot of concern about policy and regulation challenges, which I'm going to talk about kind of separately here in just a few minutes. We know that there's also really strong interest in aerospace cybersecurity learning. So something our edge research data has shown us, and then it's certainly supported by a lot of interesting anecdotes, but both, or not just both, but students, new professionals in the aerospace workplace, and then aerospace leaders, people who are experienced and seasoned and even in leadership positions, all say a very consistent thing about cybersecurity, and that is, we know we need to be concerned about it. We know we need to understand what it is, but we're not getting the training that we need. And that training is not showing up in the curriculum, in aerospace curriculum. And just so, to kind of qualify that a little bit, that's not 100% true of 100% of programs. Some universities programs have, practically no cybersecurity or digital in their aerospace curriculum for engineers or scientists. And others have a little bit, and others are in the process of introducing it. But in aggregate, certainly the view and the thought that people have, and the sentiment that we have heard repeatedly, is that people don't feel like they're getting enough training and exposure to this in a formal setting. So that's actually something that we're thinking pretty hard about. How do we meet that? I think there's a couple of strategy implications for us with that. One is, as most of you know, AIAA offers learning opportunities. So that's obviously something that we're right on top of. But I think over the longer haul, our challenge is going to be to help our stakeholders in academia and help our corporate stakeholders figure out this problem of how to train and prepare the workforce for cybersecurity challenges that are endemic and a feature now of aerospace, science, manufacturing, operations, everything. That kind of leads to a whole other area of concern that we hear about from a variety of viewpoints, and that is the rise of various standards, audit regimes, basically requirements, cybersecurity requirements that are coming from from outside of the actual design and development process. And that is to say, there are other industries, and this is where I'll kind of give you some war stories about how other industries have dealt with this. There are industries that actually have very prescriptive cybersecurity regulations. Like it is baked into the overall regulatory scheme that that governs a particular industry. One of those industries is nuclear power, and another one is the electrical grid. And I think we'd all, reasonable people would agree that's a good thing. We don't want there to be cyber attacks on nuclear power for a variety of, of safety and environmental reasons. And in particular, we don't want cyber attacks to occur against the electric grid, because we all like our electricity to be on 24/7 and without interruptions. And any of us who've actually had to have a sustained outage because of weather or because of a transformer failure or something like that, I can tell you it's more than an inconvenience. It really kind of cuts into quality of life, and that's critical infrastructure. So those two industries, though, went from having no cybersecurity regulation to having pretty rigorous cybersecurity regulation, and that was shocking to those industries. That was a hard pickup to actually do, and it took, and I would argue with electric power, it's still very much a work in progress. Getting that compliance and getting that resiliency that we really need from a cyber standpoint. And nuclear power went through a fairly traumatic, roughly 10-year period of kind of getting their cybersecurity to a state of completion. So that's a concern. And there's a couple of ways that I think that could impact aerospace. It's certainly likely that and possible at some point for the different kinds of regulation that impact aerospace operations. So I'm thinking here of things like the FAA, and I think space operations, a little more nebulous in terms of a unified and single regulatory authority. But I think the recent series of SPDs, space policy directives that this Trump administration has put into place, and they actually put into place SPD 5, so Space Policy Directive 5 came out last week, and it said there should, space operations should have cybersecurity in them. Now it was that particular directive was a little bit short of really prescriptive sort of measures, like in fact, telling a particular federal agency that they had regulatory cognizance or something like that over satellites and space operations. But it's a step in the direction of an actual regime that would apply to the cybersecurity of space operations and space hardware and so forth. So those types of things are coming. And SPD 5, like what that's ultimately going to look like is hard to say. It would, I think it's possible that more implementation steps are on the horizon for that, and that could really impact space operations pretty heavily. In the FAA, there is no explicit cybersecurity regulation, but it's kind of starting to be rolled up with all the other things around airworthiness and safety, and cybersecurity definitely comes into play there. So that's coming. That's not just Steve Lee's opinion. We're going to have these external sort of pressures to be thinking more about cybersecurity. And in fact, another whole other cybersecurity requirement that is in the offing, and it's in the process of being rolled out and implemented, and there's still a lot of questions about what it will ultimately look like. But there is this thing called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model, CMMC, which we know applies already to Department of Defense procurement. The GSA has already put it into some of its scheduling requirements, so that is an indication that it's going to impact all of government. But what CMMC is not a thing that's going to say make your spacecraft or make your aircraft or your aerial system more secure. What CMMC says is if you are an enterprise that makes anything for the government, you have to have a cyber secure environment. So your factory, your design spaces, your research and test spaces, and all of that stuff. Those things are all going to have to be demonstrably secure, and that's going to be a big shakeup. I think it's from my standpoint of experience in industry and so forth, I think it's a great step because it is impossible ultimately to separate, operational and product cybersecurity from your environment. And I'm going to give you a real world example that's not aerospace, but I think it's adjacent. And when you hear the story, you'll say, yeah, that could happen here. But one of my former nuclear power clients actually they needed a new switch in their nuclear power plant, a new network switch, and they went out to buy one, and their IT procurement department said, "Why don't you get this less expensive remanufactured switch?" And they looked at it and they said, "Well, this is not it kind of falls out of we're not required by regulation to buy a new one, so sure, let's buy this remanufactured one." So they buy this remanufactured switch, they put it in their plant, and about a month or two after they put it in, it starts beaconing out. In other words, it showed a very positive indication of being infected with a virus or a worm, or malware, we'll just say generally. And they pulled the piece of equipment out of service. They did a forensic analysis on it, and lo and behold, they found a well-known piece of malware in this switch. And it's nuclear power. It's very similar to space operations, where everything, and aviation for that matter, where every step of every process and every installation is recorded in great detail. And they were able to look at the records and figure out, where the possible points were that this thing could have gotten infected with malware. And they determined it was not anywhere in their own process. It wasn't anywhere at this particular plant's labs or test labs or its engineers or anything like that. And they figured out that it must have come from the supplier with this particular malware on it. So they contacted the supplier, and the supplier said, "Oh yeah, we forgot to tell you, our production environment was infected with this malware. And we have been getting complaints from our customers about this malware being on our remanufactured switches." And the moral of the story here is that that remanufacturer, they did not have, they might have been manufacturing and producing things to a particular standard, but that was completely undermined in their own production environment, because everything that they were sending out was actually infected with malware, and then it was ending up in things like nuclear power plants and stuff like that. And nothing bad ever happened. There was never any danger to the public or anything like that. There could have been under somewhat different circumstances. And this kind of shows that what the government is interested in doing, and it won't be just the government. I think, for example, the utility industry and nuclear power industry would be very, very interested in making sure production environment at the manufacturer is actually locked down and safe as well. So all of us here on this call, probably have, if we're, some of us are with academia, but ultimately a lot of the things that we do end up being procured by either the military or NASA or another country's space program and that kind of thing. And we can expect more of this scrutiny. And that's really what this long story, that little war story is about, is to tell you that these kinds of regulations and requirements are coming, and they are coming from multiple directions. And there's, there are other, other things are on the horizon with new cybersecurity requirements that that AIAA's members are going to have to deal with and adapt to. And the Institute wants to, you know, our mission statement is to help our members succeed. And that is this is one of the ways we want to help them succeed, is by understanding this kind of new world of on one hand real world cyber dangers, and then on the other hand all the compliance and other kinds of requirements that are coming along. So there are things on the horizon. There's a Cyber Solarium Commission. Some of you may have heard of that report, but it came out with a very long list of things that the government, and not just government, but that industry needs to do to improve cybersecurity and to protect our infrastructure. I think depending on, you know, a lot of this is dependent on politics and what the, you know, kind of the consensus is, and what the appetite is for big changes in the law and that kind of thing. And those things are ahead in the future for AIAA and its members, and for, you know, for aerospace generally. And then I think some of the most exciting new developments that we are looking forward to at AIAA that many of you are, things like you know, advanced position navigation and timing, PNT applications, urban air mobility, autonomy. All of these things are adjacent to the cybersecurity topic, and will, you know, we won't be able to fully leverage urban air mobility, for example, and all the great opportunities there are to network together aircraft and various sensors in an urban environment, so that we can have, you know, we can have flying cars and drone deliveries and things like that. There's going to be a lot of cybersecurity implications to all of that. So these are all the things that we are kind of factoring into our approach to how we are covering aerospace cybersecurity, and why AIAA needs to cover cybersecurity in the aerospace environment. So let's move on to our next slide here. This is what we're doing. Here's the kinds of the things that we are that we're doing. And you know, we have 3 principal families of products and services that we offer at AIAA, and all of you are familiar with them, I'm sure, in one form or another. And of course, the biggest one is forums, and then we have publications, and we also have learning. But for forums, you know, we've already started baking in and including cybersecurity in forum activities. At our aviation conference, it was our first all virtual conference in June. We featured a hub speaker named Steve Luzinski from a thing called the Aerospace Village. I'm going to tell you a little more about the Aerospace Village when we get to the next slide. But he gave a great hub talk. Steve is a experienced Air Force aviator and also a cybersecurity expert, and he brought some great perspectives to the hub. But where you're really going to see things ramp up is for Ascend. At Ascend, we're planning to actually do a capture the flag or hackathon type of activity around CubeSats. And then CubeSats are a very common platform for you know, for small satellites, you know, for academic and, you know, for academic institutions, for industry. And we wanted to like take something that was in common use and explore the cybersecurity implications. So we're going to have a great program with that, where we're actually going to let participants, you know, kind of get them under the hood and show them exactly what, you know, what some of the vulnerabilities are, what, you know, and how, you know, how to protect those and cover those particular vulnerabilities, and actually show some of the methodology behind, you know, protecting and hacking a CubeSat. So that's like that is a taste of programming that we intend to have on a regular basis going forward. Uh, and that's that's something that, we think it's got two main features to it. One is that one of the features is that it's something that um, that is commonly done outside in the cybersecurity world. It's a way that companies recruit new cybersecurity professionals. It's a way to kind of stretch the limits of of how cybersecurity works and of cybersecurity practice, and it's got like a very competitive dimension to it. And we see these going on in a variety, at things like the DEF CON conference and at B-sides and other kinds of cybersecurity conferences. But we also think it's very similar to something else that we already do at AIAA, because we do a design, build, fly competition every year as well. Unfortunately, I think this year it was canceled because of COVID. But the idea of getting, aerospace students and young professionals together and actually working on a hands-on project is what, we have a tradition of that, and that's something that AIAA wants to continue on with. Another type of activity that's very hands-on that we intend to have regularly featured at AIAA events going forward is something called a tabletop exercise. And one of the things, I often tell my colleagues, my staff colleagues at AIAA, and I tell members all the time, the CTF is great because it's going to develop skills, and it's going to develop, a competitive ethos around, improving cybersecurity and aerospace, and we want to do that. But I think our program would be a failure if all we ever did was cultivate more, better, greater technical proficiency around cybersecurity. There's another important thing that we need to do besides just cultivating technical excellence around cybersecurity. We need to get our leaders and managers and directors on board with cybersecurity. So the people who write the checks, who authorize headcount, who set organizational priorities, we need to set them up as the owners and leaders for cybersecurity. And I can't emphasize this enough. And it's something that in my experience out in industry, I've seen it time and time again. And that is that if the factory managers and directors, if the nuclear power plant or the substation managers do not own cybersecurity, nothing's really going to happen with it. And we need to, those are the minds that we need to change. And that's what we think the tabletop exercise will help us do. The tabletop exercise is not about technical prowess or knowing how to work a particular problem, a particular cybersecurity problem, how to configure a firewall or an intrusion detection system. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about with a tabletop is, what do the owners and managers of programs, what kinds of things do they need to know, and what kinds of things do they need to do, and what are the consequences about cybersecurity decision-making, and are they managing their programs in such a way that they are appropriately considering cybersecurity? So I'll say again, we need to change the hearts and minds of leaders and rising leaders about cybersecurity, and we have the tabletop exercise as a kind of a shining example of an engaging, exciting, hands-on activity where we are going to we're going to start doing that. So look for that at Ascend, and look for that at our future at our future forums as well. And then we have other types of activity going on at Ascend. We have a cyber meta discussion that will be a panel discussion among some senior space leaders who will be talking about cybersecurity and kind of discussing how cybersecurity will factor into, future missions and future programs. One of the participants in that is going to be the head of something called the Space ISAC. And ISAC is a information sharing and analysis center. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little more about those and what AIAA is doing with the ISACs. But that's the cyber meta discussion. And then we're going to have a cybersecurity tutorial. So I mentioned before that we have a group, an existing group, the Aerospace Cybersecurity Working Group. Those individuals are working very hard on creating this tutorial that's almost like the 101 level of how cybersecurity works across aerospace. And we're going to eventually change that into learning, and it will be the basis for a family of learning activities that'll be separate from the forums, but it's going to make its debut there at Ascend. And I hope you all will, if you're coming to Ascend, that you can avail yourself to all of these things. SciTech, we've got, as I mentioned, we've got more of the same plan. We've got another Capture the Flag or hackathon planned. Very likely to be another tabletop exercise, and then we're going to have some special sessions with other senior leaders and hopefully with the heads of the ISACs. I'll give you some more detail on the ISACs here in a minute. And then in this COVID time, we're quickly realizing that our forums have taken on a different shape, and they've been all the ones that we've done in the COVID time without the benefit of physical presence, but we're doing them online and virtually. We're learning as we go. We're getting really good attendance and uptake, and we're getting really good feedback on how they're going. But one of the things that is very likely to emerge, and this doesn't just pertain to cybersecurity, but it pertains to AIAA programming overall, is that there will probably be more programming in between forums. So look for more webinars and podcasts and things like that. For example, one of the things we're already running is a thing called the Space Policy Podcast. And you can go on our website and subscribe to that and listen to individual episodes of that podcast. But the podcast and the webinar is going to be an increasingly frequent vehicle for AIAA and cyber. We've already got the plans laid out of what that's going to look like for cyber. So there will certainly be more of that. You all know our publications really well. I mentioned daily launch. There's a cybersecurity section in the daily launch now, and it's always got a story in it. Basically, I can say that today. When we started doing it, I wasn't sure I'd be able to say that, but now I think roughly 8 or 9 months into that experiment, it's working pretty good. Aerospace America is our magazine. There's an upcoming special cyber issue that's coming out that will coincide with Cybersecurity Month, which is next month, October. So look out for that. There's a couple of really engaging stories in there. But Aerospace America has also, they've been part of our drumbeat of publication content on aerospace cybersecurity with issues having, we're placing cybersecurity stories in those with increasing frequency. I can't say every issue, but we're working up to that, and there is lots of stuff in there. And then on books, and I should say here, books and journals, that's a longer play. I'll be honest with you. We can't just say, we can't just find an author, assign him, and have him write a book, or him or her write a book in a few months or even a year's time. But we do have things in the works with our books and journals to kind of ramp up and increase cybersecurity coverage in our journals and in our book line. So be on the lookout for that. And then finally, our learning programming. I mentioned earlier about, you know, setting up we're going to be launching a cybersecurity learning in the next year. The over the, and that will be, I will just call it the 101 level. It's easy for me to imagine follow-on training offerings that might be focused on something like, say, cybersecurity in the engineering and development process, you know, or in the program in program management practice, which is to say, how do we get cybersecurity into existing and integrated with existing processes, and who do you talk to, you know, if you're designing a new space system or a new avionics system or something like that, who do you talk to? You know, who do you engage in your organization? And there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And, you know, to kind of go back to some of the things that we heard earlier, or that I mentioned earlier, about things that we've uncovered just by studying our membership demand and what the community needs. There's certainly a big need for those kinds of things as well. So we will definitely have at least one learning out in the next year. There will probably be more successively more specialized types of things in the years to follow. And then over the very long range, I certainly don't want anyone to think that this is a promise that this is going to happen in 1 year or even 2 years, but I think this is a multi-year process. Anyone who's been around cybersecurity, the cybersecurity workforce issues in particular, will know immediately that cybersecurity certifications are a big deal. They're a really big deal, in fact. And if you want to do cybersecurity work in government, you definitely have to figure out, you know, what kinds of certifications your staff needs and that sort of thing. That is a place we would like to end up. We don't know what that would look like. It's actually a fairly complex process and a fairly complex issue, but we want ultimately to be in a mode where we are, you know, setting an industry-wide standard for what cybersecurity knowledge in aerospace looks like. That could include certifications. Looks like we got a comment or a question here. Looks like from Mitch Ingham. Thanks, Mitch. Says current policy directives are not overly prescriptive as to how space government and industry architect and implement cybersecurity, although there have been some early attempts to overly prescribe specific measures that were not driven by mission-specific risks. Please comment on how this window of opportunity to figure out how to do it right for our systems where one size does not fit all. That's a great question, Mitch. I think this is the balance that will need to be struck, and this is why. First of all, I want to say one of the things that is super important about getting AIAA membership and getting the aerospace community energized about cybersecurity is that we all, as a community, need to own this. And that means that we need to kind of come up with the best practices, introduce the parameters ourselves based on what our mission needs are, rather than let them be dictated from outside. Because again, I've seen this in other industries where basically somebody who thinks that, you know, a regulatory agency or body that knows the theory of cybersecurity, but not necessarily the industry, you know, they make up, I don't want to say they make up, but they develop standards, they develop practices, and then they expect industry to implement them. And it turns out it's actually really hard, you know, because the people who came up with the standard or the idea really didn't have a lot of firsthand knowledge of how that worked in real life, you know, in the field, if you will. And we need to short circuit that. I mean, and we need to be kind of owning this whole discussion and in fact driving it so that we are not in a position where um, we are frozen in time or locked into specific paradigms because that was the way it was drawn into a regulation or a rule. And one of the things one of the reasons I think that is of critical importance is that, and without sounding like um, almost like science fiction or something, or being okay, I'll admit I'm about to be a cheerleader for space programming and development. Changes are going to come quick. Changes are going to come really, really fast. And one of the things that I think too rigid of a regulation scheme would impart upon us is kind of freezing us in time. Like there's a way we do things now, and we develop some cybersecurity that is compliant from a regulatory standpoint. And what that ends up causing is for us not to innovate past that point, because it would be too hard to please the regulator or something like that. That is exactly what we want to avoid. I think other industries have had experiences like that, where it's like it's too hard to implement this new technology or this new paradigm because we'll never get the regulators to sign off on it, because they are back on 15 or 20 years ago when we were doing it a different way. So I think, Mitch, I don't have an easy answer for you. Like here's a methodology, or here's an approach or a paradigm that will work. I don't have anything like that to offer, but I do think it's absolutely imperative that the people on this call and the wider AIAA membership, and then our aerospace colleagues who are not necessarily AIAA members, they all need to be brought into this dialogue to to shape it and make sure that we have cybersecurity that serves what aerospace needs best, rather than what outsiders or people who are not who are less than expert on this stuff. I hope that answer makes sense. All right. So forums, publications, and learning are AIAA's major product offerings all will have cybersecurity, and we've just talked about where that's going. Let's talk about a whole separate kind of range of activities. That's on our next slide. And that is, our outreach. It's great that we're getting this all into programming, but at a whole other level, we need to engage internally, and we need to engage externally to advance our cybersecurity program. And the first thing I'll talk about here is our cybersecurity steering group. I mentioned to you all that last summer and fall, the Board of Trustees decided to take the big step of formalizing the cybersecurity program and hiring me and getting me in and inducing a lot of activity across the institute to get a cybersecurity program going. And part of that was start integrating cybersecurity into programming, like we just talked about on the last slide. Another thing that the Board of Trustees indicated that they wanted was input. They wanted direction. They wanted expert direction to help form their governance and to provide input to the leadership that they provide to the Institute. So we have the cybersecurity steering group, and it's about 10 different people. A few of them are members, but a few are, but most are not members. They are aerospace cybersecurity experts from a variety of other different types of organizations. We've got representatives from space and aviation and defense. We've got 2 representatives of what I'm just going to call the hacker and research community. And we've got representatives from international organizations like ICAO, all kind of inputting to this into this committee's work. What we're focused on right now with the group is making specific program recommendations to the Board of Trustees from this body of experts. This, by the way, this steering group is absolutely not, it's dynamic. We're not locked into a particular membership and a particular scheme of representation of like different communities. This was just our first cut. I suspect as this group evolves, becomes more formal, and becomes more formal and has a better, I would just call it a better link to the Board of Trustees, that the composition and the kind of the size of the steering committee will probably change a little bit, but we're expecting to put out our first recommendations at the end of next month. Our first real emphasis is on programming, and some of the things that you just heard, I think this particular panel will probably amplify the direction that we're on right now with the integration of programming, and also on publications. I think some of the longer term activity that needs to happen that I think this committee will recommend is going to take some real creativity and a long view to implement. So that's what you can kind of expect to hear hear from the cybersecurity steering group and the Board of Trustees, and the recommendations that the steering group are going to make. But this is like the main input into the senior most governance of AIAA. But we've got activity going on inside and among members right now. We have, in particular, the Aerospace Cybersecurity Working Group that I know that Mitch, who's on the call, is involved with. I think I haven't seen the attendee roster here, but I think there might be another member or two on this call. But if you're interested in that, I would, send me a note, send Mitch a note, or send Sam Adhikari a note. And if you just reach out to me, I'll connect you to who you need to be connected to if you're interested in participating in the ACWG. Right now, their principal activity, and this has been, for roughly the past year or so, has been the production of the cybersecurity tutorial, which will be which will end up being a basis for training going forward. But they're producing that for Ascend, and we have a dedicated Engage resource for them. They're certainly one of my, I absolutely cannot take credit for this, and I think a couple of the key members like Sam, like Mitch, have been kind of driving the use of our Engage resource. So that's way up. So this group is becoming more, measurably more active and productive as well. So this is one of the main ways that our members are engaged on cybersecurity. And again, I do a little bit of facilitation for them, but this is members in action. This is members coming up with ideas and executing things. And the thing I feel lucky enough to do is to be able to kind of give them some of the tools that they need to succeed, and to like make this tutorial work, and give them, help maintain this place online for them to be engaged and so forth. We're looking at increased cyber engagement with sections and branches. Today's activity is an excellent example of that. So here we are. This is AIAA staff, working shoulder to shoulder with all of you all in the LALV section. And we hope there's a lot more of this kind of interaction going forward. And if you're, in addition to the kind of the geographic sections and branches, AIAA has I would just characterize it as an extensive network of committees that do different, you know, that are committed to different kinds of activities. There's definitely been an uptick in that activity as well. And again, you know, my mission is to kind of lean forward, support and enable those like the information IS is information systems, but working with Mitch, working with Terry Morris, working with others who are the, you know, the member leaders of our not just cybersecurity, but the adjacent information systems and you know, digital things and the different complex systems integration, other types of committees like that. Those are other places we are trying to, you know, create awareness and you know, kind of amplify and increase the visibility of cybersecurity. And I'll go back to the, you know, one of my themes that I said earlier, which is, you know, I want to cultivate a constituency of, you know, of people who are interested in cybersecurity across AIAA, but I also want integration to happen, which is to say, I want leaders and others who, you know, just, and rising leaders to be engaged on this topic, because ultimately their leadership, their allocation of resources and priorities are going to make all of this work. So that's kind of member engagement and how we're trying to amp it up and invigorate it. And I would encourage you, if you are part of one of these committees that has, you know, that has a stake in cybersecurity, like complex systems integration, for example, avionics, please think of cybersecurity. Please feel free to call on me to assist in any way, because we want to get cyber integrated with the agendas of all those other committees. So we've talked so far about bringing cybersecurity to AIAA. When we start talking about external relations and outreach, now we're talking about bringing AIAA to the cybersecurity and to other organizations that are interested in cybersecurity. One of those organizations that we have a close relationship with, and we've actually helped with, is something called the Aerospace Village. Now, many of you are probably aware of a hacking conference, customarily takes place in Las Vegas, but this year it took place virtually, called DEF CON. DEF CON has a, you know, underneath DEF CON and all the hacking contests and all that kind of things that they have going on, they have a system of villages, and these villages are oriented toward specific subject matter areas like industrial control systems or medical devices and aerospace. So AIAA has been partnered with and has worked very closely with Aerospace Village over the past year, and that culminated in our AIAA support to Aerospace Village during DEF CON last month, and it was a great success. If you want to see any of the content from Aerospace Village, I would strongly urge you to do it. Go look on YouTube. They have Aerospace Village has a website, which is very good. But if you want to see the content, go look at the Aerospace Village channel on YouTube. I'm sorry I didn't put a link up here for it. Maybe someone will put that up on the chat box. There's a lot of great stuff in there. Some of it's very in the weeds type of thing, where, you know, they're talking about exploiting a specific or hacking or protecting a particular piece of avionics gear or communications gear or something like that. And then there are some really awesome, insightful overviews of different aerospace cybersecurity topics. I would recommend, in particular, there's a really good one called it's like the Airport Choose Your Own Adventure, and it's really a great overview of how complex the information technology network and system is from the standpoint of airline passengers. You know, all the different systems that get touched and not touched and get involved, and that's a really good view. one of our members, Pam Melroy, who is an astronaut, gave a great talk on the International Space Station and shuttle operations and cybersecurity. That was quite good and quite interesting. And another member, Michael Van Guardia, talked about integrating cybersecurity into product development in aerospace. Those are some really good talks. I'd highly recommend them. And what we are doing with Aerospace Village is we're kind of complementing each other. A couple of their key members are already helping us out, for example, with the cybersecurity steering group. But Steve Luzinski, who I mentioned earlier, who gave a great hub talk at our aviation forum, he's one of the principals behind Aerospace Village. We hope to get one of their other leaders, a guy named Pete Cooper, to come and talk at one of our upcoming forums or at another event. But they both have been big supporters of AIAA's program, and then in turn our program has been assisting them and kind of developing more outreach and more contacts with the cybersecurity community. And Aerospace Village is very informal. The next thing I'm going to tell you about, though, is actually quite formal, and that's the information sharing and analysis centers. So I mentioned to you earlier, I've worked with industry for 6 or 7 years here, and before that, my kind of lead in to working with industry on cybersecurity was working with the Department of Homeland Security on cybersecurity. And Department of Homeland Security, if you're not aware, has a cadre of staff and some organizations that are devoted to creating better relationships with industry to bring about better information sharing. And the critical infrastructure of the United States is not owned by the federal government. It is mostly owned by the private sector. So the issue of a good working relationship between government and industry is always been a thorny and a tough one. So what the ISACs are that bridge between government and amongst industry, and it has two functions. Each of the information sharing analysis centers has two functions. One is to facilitate the sharing of information between industry and government. So when government's got good information, let's say that the intelligence community produces some good threat information, they use the ISAC as a way to communicate that information out to industry in the safest and most fair way possible. So in other words, they're bound by, the federal government is bound by law to pass along any, and I repeat, any actionable intelligence to its respective industry. And that there's a long history behind that goes back to the Pan Am 103 bombing. But and nowadays, though, if the intelligence uncovers that a foreign country's hackers are about to try to put malware on a bit of critical American infrastructure, then there's a whole mechanism that swings into action that gets that information out to that piece of critical infrastructure. So if, let's say, for example, there's information that Russian hackers are going to try to break into a particular bank, or Iranian hackers are going to break into a particular bank. Well, the intelligence community has to share that information. Well, they do that through the ISAC. So that's one function, is the sharing of information between the government and industry. And that works another way too. And that means that when industry learns things that might be interesting to the government, that gets passed up through the ISAC as well. And you may be wondering, well, why does that need to happen through an ISAC? Why can't Bank of America or Pacific Gas and Electric, why can't they talk to just go talk to the federal government about this. Well, in these, regulated industries, for example, the companies are actually very nervous and wary about talking directly to the government. So the ISAC gives a way to kind of anonymize and give some cover to any of those kinds of concerns, because they don't want regulatory action coming down on them because the federal government sees a particular piece of threat information or something, and they can kind of take that back. So the ISAC creates this kind of buffer between government and industry. The other thing it does is that it facilitates sharing within an industry. Now, our kind of that we belong to, and you can see here, aviation, space, and national defense, we're competitive in aviation and space and national defense, but we're not that competitive, not like some other industries. And to give the example, if you think of the financial services industry, they have their own ISAC, and it happens to be probably the biggest, the best funded, and the most capable ISAC. You think of big banks, big investment houses, they are competing tooth and nail against each other. And they are trying to beat each other in the marketplace and all that stuff. But the ISAC gives them kind of a place where the gloves can come off and they can share information. And they can do that without giving away proprietary information, without giving away competitive sensitive information, and that kind of thing. So the ISAC has that other important function as well, is to facilitate sharing among companies that may actually be fiercely competitive. And I see a comment here. It says, the subject is a big concern for our startup. Thank you for having this webinar and the information you're sharing. And actually, a lot of startups, for example, they don't want to go sharing information with other parts of their industry because they don't want to give away their competitive secrets. That's actually a very big deal for a lot of space and aviation companies, particularly new ones who frankly are afraid of big competitors and things like that. So the ISAC creates this neutral ground where there can be neutral discussions about cybersecurity vulnerabilities and things like that. So as a result, there's three of them that AIAA works with. One is the aviation ISAC, and the other is the space ISAC. Aviation ISAC is based in Annapolis, Maryland, so right outside of Washington, D.C. Space ISAC is based in Colorado, and National Defense ISAC is based in Washington, D.C. as well. But they have this function of sharing information back up and down to the federal government and then across industry among competitors. They've all been around. Space ISAC is the newest. It's been around for about a year. Aviation ISAC, I think, is about 6 or 7 years old. National Defense ISAC has had a couple of different names. I think it might have actually been around for maybe 10 or 15 years, but they all have slightly different cultures. Not all of these ISACs run exactly the same way, but they are organizations that AIAA is in the process of partnering with to help promote cybersecurity across aerospace. And some of the ways that will work is, for example, all three of these ISACs, when we talk about the workforce, for example, they all have the observations to make about the workforce. Like we're not getting enough skilled cyber employees in aerospace. How do we get them? What can we do to kind of make up the shortfall? Well, AIAA is in a great position to help them with that. And that's the kind of partnership we ultimately want to cultivate with them, is that we are going to help them with things that they're not equipped very well to do. And then they are going to be doing the things that they're equipped really well to do, like sharing threat information and, creating that better relationship with government. And they actually have all the ways of dealing with classified information and all that kind of stuff. And those are things that AIAA is not really in a good position to be helpful on. So we definitely see ourselves as a strong complement to these organizations that have very similar goals to ours. So I think maybe some other questions and remarks here I see here. Do the pilots of the computer or the machine fly the plane? Well, the pilots fly the plane. The computer helps them, and then there's a lot of there's a lot of things that I would characterize as not fully. You don't really fully think of them as computers, but they are in fact very special purpose-built computers. For example, engine, all engine control on a modern aircraft. It's all digital, which means that between the pilot's hand on the throttle and the engine, there's a computer kind of processing all that and making the most optimal adjustments to all the inputs to the engine's controls. And the same thing for all the other controls on the airplanes. So there's a lot of little computers scattered all over the plane doing very specific things. And then there are some computers that have kind of what I would call executive functions. So those are the things that are characterized as like autopilots and different things of that nature. So the pilots actually fly it. The computer helps and does, and actually in certain cases does specific, kind of sub functions of what the pilot does. I think the concern is, about, well, what's the pilot's responsibility for cybersecurity? And I think the pilot's responsible for cybersecurity is just like his responsibility for anything else that is involved with flying the airplane. Is if the plane is not responding the way it ought to, or a system is not responding the way it ought to, the pilot's going to be the first to know that. And that's really one of their principal sort of input to this. By the way, there was a great presentation at the DEF CON Aerospace Village about pilot reactions to cybersecurity incidents in the cockpit that you might find kind of interesting. The other thing I would say about, pilots have a responsibility for aerospace cybersecurity, but anybody in the entire kind of chain or cycle or ecosystem has at least some responsibility for cybersecurity. I'll give the example of pilots again. Most of you are probably aware that most pilots now use something called the electronic flight bag. And what the electronic flight bag is, it's either a laptop or more likely an iPad that has all the navigation information and the flight plans, and all the pilot's paperwork is electronic and on this gadget. On an iPad or something, and at some point they actually plug it in, and it downloads navigation information and approach plates and all that kind of stuff into the systems on the airplane, and then they go fly their trip or their mission. So one of the pilot's prime responsibilities regarding that electronic flight bag is protecting it. That is a very important cybersecurity function of aircrew, is protection of all of their digital equipment, which is to say, what are you going to plug that iPad into? Anything? No, you're not. And are you going to use that electronic flight bag iPad for just anything? No, you are not. You are not going to go to strange websites with it. You're not going to, check your eBay auctions or or use TikTok or anything like that on it. What you're going to only use it for is for things with the airplane. And, would you hand it to a stranger and let them have control of it? And the answer to that is no. And those may not seem like cybersecurity responsibilities, but they are. And that is why everybody has a role to play. Even the people who maintain the aircraft, even if they don't touch any avionics, they've got very similar responsibilities. You should not be plugging anything into any part of the airplane unless you know exactly what it is, what that piece of equipment is and where it's been, and and all of those kinds of things. And that's not a whole lot different. I don't know how many aircraft or spacecraft maintainers we have on the call, but that's not a whole lot different than how work is done in the kind of the very high consequence environment of, you know, of satellite or aircraft construction and maintenance. You know, nothing goes in that you don't account for, and we just need to apply that with digital equipment as well. Any other questions or concerns? And how am I doing on time, Ken?
It's all right. I think we still have like 10, 15 minutes.
Awesome.
Oh, while we're waiting for more questions, I have a quick comment. Actually, do you know AIAA has the regional student conference? It's just this regional conference. For example, for us, it's April. Region 6 is going to conduct a student. They do this every year in different regions. So for this next year, this fiscal year is held in Long Beach. In Region 6, you know, for other regions, they're in different schools. So they do have publication, you know, a paper, those kinds of things, you know, contests, you know. So maybe it can somehow, you know, incorporate this, you know, the aerospace village idea or hack set or those kind of idea into the student, you know, conference,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, we also do some kind of aerospace, sorry, student branch mini conference, but mostly right now is just presentation. But of course, you and your people are highly welcome or suggest people we can participate. I know students are interested. We actually have students asking about how their career, how they should they also do a minor in computer science, you know, computer engineering, you know, all these things, you know. So the interest is there. And actually, a lot of our people actually, even in the audience today, they actually work somehow in some of the cybersecurity department in aerospace companies. So that may be a good way to incorporate your program.
Absolutely.
You know.
And to anyone on the call who's involved with the planning and execution of any of these regional events, I would welcome the contact. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. Um, I think my contact information is in the is somewhere in the notes here, but it's Steve L at AIAA.org. Reach out to me, and we'll start talking about how we can get some cybersecurity content in one of these other student events and regional events.
Steve, I think Pedro, Mr. Velasco has some comments. Pedro, do you want to speak out? You are unmuted. Um, or Steve, can you see his comments in the chat
Yeah,
room?
flights are part of the cybersecurity environment stakeholders, but also the inter-air traffic centers are responsible for the maintenance.
Simplemente yo quise opinar.
Pedro, did you just join?
Yeah, I think he muted himself, but now he's muted himself again.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, so the cybersecurity at air traffic centers is a key part of what we're thinking about and looking at, and it's the air traffic management system. So yeah, that's a high area for concern for cybersecurity. It's considered to be a critical infrastructure by the Department of Homeland Security. In other words, it's considered vital to the functioning of our nation. And I think we have all had the experience, of knowing that when air traffic control goes out or has a problem, that slows flights down and all of those kinds of things. So I know that FAA works very carefully on that, and I know that so that's one piece of that process that I'm familiar with, and they have an extensive cybersecurity function within FAA to manage and control that problem. But I think a whole other concern with the cybersecurity on air traffic control is so that's the system that's at the middle, right? And that's radars and transponders and a whole lot of other equipment. But there's also concern that you know, aircraft have input into that, like individual aircraft have input into that. So one of the cybersecurity concerns there is, are aircraft, are the navigation and avionics systems that communicate with the air traffic control system, are they vulnerable to attack? Can they be subverted or hijacked to like do false things? You know, like, and there's, again, there's a lot of work that's been done out there on spoofing various navigation and identification signals and that kind of thing. So those are definitely concerns. And I know that a lot of smart people in Aerospace Village and among our members and stuff are, you know, have done some important work around that. I hope that answers the question or the concern that was raised.
Okay. Mark, Mr. Oberter, or Christina, do you want to say something? I know you're very interested in this topic. You are unmuted. You are welcome to say anything. Well, yeah, you're right. Actually, the FAA, you know, those things, air control, these are very important. And I know a lot of people, local GA, and some people they're kind of very into the ADSB, you know,
Yeah.
you know, some other, they even have a very good tracking system, and all those control tower, you know, or those systems is ultra important, you know, for the cybersecurity issues. And then also at some point, I think this they were also talking about the social media. You know, they also have some, you know, social media as a kind of possible loophole for aerospace companies. You know, the cybersecurity uh, leak. You know, those kinds of things.
Right. Right.
Okay, so let's see. So, Mark, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to say something, Mr. Oberter? Also, Mitch, you are unmuted. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll throw something out there. I mean, there's been some discussion in the aircraft context, and certainly air traffic control is a huge area of concern for here. But I'm from NASA JPL. I represent the space side of AIAA's constituency, and I can attest that this is a huge area of growing concern, and I mean exponentially growing concern in our business. And I think the biggest reason is that it represents a huge tension area, right? Nobody pays aerospace engineers, you know, for their prowess in security. It's a requirement now that's becoming increasingly challenging to meet. So Steve, I mean, you have a lot of experience dealing with this kind of tension, right? I think one of the big challenges is getting project managers to realize that they can't just sweep this under the rug or hope that somebody else will handle this for them anymore, right? I mean, this is you know, no one wants to spend a ton of their money on cybersecurity because there's only so much money to complete the mission, right, or to build the system. But you can't do that without, you know, without thinking about this to some degree, and it's the question of what's the right amount, right, Steve?
Right. Right. And it is. I think what you're getting at is kind of underscores the importance of integration in cybersecurity. You know, cybersecurity is not a thing you can bolt on at the end, or, you know, right out of a peanut butter jar onto everything and hope it's protected. The real effective answers in response to this are that cybersecurity is incorporated early in design, and it's and integrated all the way across like a whole design life cycle. But also, and this is like the not technical part of it, but it's the very much the human part of it. Leaders need to emphasize the importance and legitimize cybersecurity. That is where the real change needs to happen. And it can't be regarded as something that some guys in the basement do and they come in later and they'll fix it. That approach might have worked reasonably well in enterprise cybersecurity. In other words, email and office servers and all that kind of stuff. It's not going to work in, our higher stakes environment where performance and, resource constraints are always going to be a reality. Like we've got to hold the weight of everything down. We've got to keep things under budget and make it fit into the aircraft or spacecraft we're building, all of those kinds of things. And I cannot emphasize enough, integration and leadership. Those are the ways that we're ultimately going to kind of solve this and be able to bring it to bear. But ignoring it or hoping someone else will solve it is not going to do it. Is that making sense, Mitch?
Yeah, music to my ears, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, also I realize, large corporations, they generally have their resources and the people for handle it. And as you just mentioned, startup company, small business, the kind of the borderline, and most of a lot of software or tools, they're aiming for small business or startup type. But, there are also some individuals, they express concern, because they are, it's too expensive to buy the software, and there is actually no proper tool for individual or smaller groups. They can afford. And is there anything they can do about it? This is a typical question we got from our attendees in the aerospace cybersecurity event.
For in the startup space, and I've heard a lot of concern about this over time. I don't think there's an easy answer to, particularly if it's it's a couple of friends from Stanford who are, finally, or they used to work at, JPL or Aerospace or someplace like that, and now they're out on their own trying to do something, and they're doing it on a shoestring. This is a kind of a topic that, just like payroll or other, quality management programs. I mean, it may seem like there's not, if your company is not big enough or your program is not big enough to factor that in, I hate to say this, it's not an excuse. It can't, you still need to factor it in. And I would implore anybody who's in the startup space to, if they can't devote people to it, and I understand in a very small enterprise that it's probably not possible to devote people to it. You've got to put the time in to what the possible cybersecurity problems are, and you've got to make allowance for it anyways and early to be able to get it right, because when it's in the field, or when you've got, when you've engineered it into a prototype and you can't make significant changes, you might wreck what you're doing by trying to do it at a later time. So I wish there was an easy answer to say, oh, that's fine. You don't have to do cybersecurity because you're small. You're still going to have to figure out a way to do it. And I would say it would be a very worthwhile investment of time and effort to start working through the cybersecurity early, rather than not at all, or hoping it will not be noticed or will go away, because that's not going to be a success path at all.
But Steve, this is Mitch. On the flip side, though, the good news is that you've got to right size this, right? I mean, you do need to figure out what is your risk, right? And that's where most organizations fail, right? Is they think that they can just follow whatever prescribed policies the government or someone has laid out, and they'll be fine or good enough. And really, it comes down to what is the risk in fielding your system or flying your system. I mean, even at JPL, we fly, billion-dollar flagship missions, and we fly, small number of million-dollar CubeSat missions. And you can't assume that the former's approach to cybersecurity will even remotely be appropriate for the latter, right? So I think that on the bright side, all it takes is thinking carefully about what your risk posture is, and how you interplay in the grander scheme of things of aerospace.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, Steve, actually, I just mentioned CubeSat. I think this is also, that remind me, that's also a very good opportunity. For example, Professor Scott Paulo, if you read Aerospace America, there's an article about his group, student in University of Colorado Boulder, about the student CubeSat project during COVID-19. And they are going to speak next week. And also the design, build, and fly. It's actually become virtual this year, and the first place winner, the USC Aero Design Team, is going to speak next week as well. So the people are student or professor doing this CubeSat thing, and it's a good thing to incorporate your program. And actually we have previous some speaker, they're also AIAA member professor. They are doing this. They even have the student control center, the CubeSat. So it's good to incorporate this. And Steve, you'll find this actually Southern California. Well, I know a lot of more Southern California, and maybe a little bit San Francisco. There are a lot of things, wait for your discovery, for you to discover. For example, JPL a few years ago, Amish will know much better. There's a space conference. There are speaker talking about cybersecurity in the MBSE model, or their satellite kind of model or ground control center. And Aerospace Corporation, of course, is a big effort in this. But there are a lot of small business, individual. There are a lot of interest in this area. They're waiting to, for AIAA to explore, to develop the program. It just, we try, but people don't see it's some kind of, organized effort like you're doing, and people kind of scatter around. The FAA is also typically hard to get them to participate, but we see the interest in, people doing the aviation, ADS-B, GA, those kind of things. So definitely, so we're looking into a continual, collaboration with you and match what you are doing. And we also have newsletter articles, so if anything, we can highly welcome as well.
Awesome. Thanks.
So we don't see any further questions. So do you have any final comments, notes?
No, but thank you for inviting me here. I appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about our program, and I look forward to hearing from some of you. If you want to reach out anytime, I'd welcome an email and a conversation. But thank you, Ken, for thinking of this program and for inviting me. And I appreciate the time that you all have given me today. And I welcome conversations with all of you.
Oh, Steve, thank you. Thank you. Great effort. I saw Mark unmuted. Do you want to say something, Mark?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. I was having trouble earlier with my audio setting on my computer, but I got it figured out.
Okay, but do you, Christina, want to say something?
Unfortunately, Christina couldn't make it, so
How about you?
I'm just the one here, and like I say, the computer is not my area of expertise. I mean, even as a small company, we have like 30 employees, but we're already starting to feel the pinch of the CMMC there, and people are complaining about entering their password every time they turn away to take a sip of coffee. But it is happening.
Yeah, one last question that I see here from Jules Ross. It says, hacking a space station would lead to yes, absolutely it would. This is very, very high consequence stuff. And it's, it can't be emphasized, that cybersecurity needs to be like taken care of. It needs to be essentially the table stakes for for viable manned space operations. But B, it also cannot be ignored until the last minute, and it really needs to be on the table at the very earliest stage of mission conception and design, rather than like, whoa, my goodness, we've got to worry about the cybersecurity of this now that we've developed this or that particular system. So I agree with the sentiment expressed there, and I say I would say that it emphasizes the need for integration of cybersecurity at the earliest possible opportunity in the design process.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Stay in touch. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks again. I really enjoyed talking with you all today, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so after this Steve wonderful presentation, very exciting, and we'll move on to our next distinguished speaker. Let me see if I can pull the slides for introduction. Yes, it's there. Okay. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Harold White. He is like us to call him Sonny. Dr. White is the Director of Advanced Research Development in Advanced Research and Development in Limitless Space Institute, LSI. He was also formerly the Advanced Propulsion Team Lead Engineering in the Johnson Space Center. He is also the rep of JSC through Nuclear System Working Group. He was a PhD physics from Rice University, also have mechanical engineering degree. He has accumulated very long years of experience in working in aerospace industry from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, NASA, and now with LSI. He's currently is the director, as we mentioned, in LSI. He leads all the research and development work in the LSI, basically for established priorities and recommendations for investigating and expenditures. He also got grants, and other resources in support of R&D efforts, and also markets LSI to major benefactors and to increase resources and related R&D efforts, and conducts, arrange, and schedule events, and ensures appropriately related well-known individuals are involved. He has a long years in NASA, so he basically served as Advanced Propulsion Team Lead in NASA Engineering Directorate, and he also was a JSC representative to the Nuclear System Working Group, and he helped the agency to incorporate high TRL advanced power and propulsion technologies into near and mid-term human exploration architectures. He also pursues theoretical and laboratory research on developing lower TRL advanced propulsion and power technologies in Advanced Propulsion Physics Laboratory known as EagleWorks, that is located at Johnson Space Center. Over the past 19 years, he has worked with a number of academia, industry, and government to further grow his area of research, resulting in many published papers, presentations, development, and the study of physics models, engineering tools, and the implementation and execution of multiple high-fidelity experimental results. So basically, whatever you're excited about those advanced propulsion, he's the guy, he's the person. He also certified people, knowing who is doing the good things. Dr. White has been recognized, highly honored many times over the span of his career for his excellent work ethic, which is very important to aerospace and anywhere. Exceptional technical skills, abilities as project manager, and a dedication to pursuit of human spaceflight. And while serving as the shuttle remote manipulator system manager during the return to flight, he was awarded the NASA Medal for excellence in achievement by the administrator for his role in getting the thermal protection system robotic inspection tools built. delivered, and certified to support the STS-114 mission. He was recognized by the Crew Office with a Silver Spoonie Award for his unwavering commitment to safety and mission success. This is ultra important. Demonstrated by his action in the discovery and disposition of critical damage of the robotic arm prior to the STS-121 mission. He has also received the Spaceflight Awareness Honorary Award for the STS-122 mission, one of the highest, most prestigious awards available to employees of NASA. So we are honored and thrilled to have Dr. Harold White to be with us today to deliver the lecture for a very exciting topic. So welcome, Dr. White.
Hey, thanks, Ken. I appreciate the very kind introduction. Let me see if I can share my screen. While I'm doing that, I just want to make a comment. It was, listening to your talk, Steve, about cybersecurity. I kept having this, playing back this mental sequence from a TV show. I don't know if you're familiar with a TV show called Battlestar Galactica. There was something they rebooted in the last 10 years or something, where one of the very first episodes, all of the good guy spaceships had all of their spaceships hacked, if you will, and they all got taken out by the bad guys as a result of that. So that was really kind of playing in my head as you were talking about the importance of cybersecurity in aerospace. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right. There we go, all right. So the talk I'm going to give today, the title is Go Incredibly Fast. I'll explain that in just a second. Before I get into some of the technical stuff, let me give you guys a little bit of an overview of the Limitless Space Institute, what we're about. I left NASA in December of 2019 to come help stand up the Limitless Space Institute. So I think we've got a very worthy objective and mission and a lot of hard work in front of us. We're very busy. We've got a lot of stuff going on. We've got some neat things to talk to you guys about today. And it's nice to be able to engage in this type of a forum where we can get really into some of the technical details and spend a little bit of time unpacking some stuff. Sometimes when you give short talks at some of the different engagements, you just can't get down into some of the details like we like to do. So this is kind of nice to be able to do this on a Saturday. So this is our vision, mission statement perspective from Limitless Space Institute. We're very much about trying to advance human exploration beyond our solar system. Our mission is we want to inspire and educate the next generation to travel beyond our solar system. And we want to support the research and development of enabling technologies towards that objective. Kind of our North Star, the thing that gets us up every morning and keeps us moving forward is trying to enable interstellar travel by the turn of the century. And that's a very high goal, a lot of difficult work between here and there. But we think it's certainly worth pursuit, and we're pursuing it with a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And I think you'll see in a lot of ways we're trying to make measured progress in a lot of different areas. When you talk about human exploration into the outer solar system and on to the stars, the distances that are involved are just mind-boggling. Very different from anything we think of in human space flight, whether it's Earth, Moon, or even Earth, Mars. If you want to try and cover some of the distances involved when you're talking about exploring the outer solar system in timeframes that are compatible with humans, you have to put an enormous amount of energy into the vehicle and take that energy out to be able to start from your starting point and capture at your destination point. You, in effect, have to be able to go incredibly fast. So that's just kind of like a very simplistic haiku-like statement that really captures what's necessary. You have to be able to go incredibly fast. And so with that type of a requirement, physics is physics. That means we have to have some significant improvements and advancements in the power and propulsion systems that we use to try and accomplish these types of missions. Now this infographic here helps give you a window of insight into how we view the technology trade space. You know, there's in our estimation, there's 3 major swim lanes, if you will, that kind of cover the different technologies you could bring to bear on trying to go incredibly fast. And they span from known physics, known engineering, to unknown physics and unknown engineering. So on the left, we've got a swim lane that we title fission. And so this is based on nuclear reactors. In this case, you see from my little cartoon there, can you see my mouse when I move it there, Steve? Sorry, Ken, can you see my mouse?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, very good. So here on this little graphic here, we've got a nuclear electric propulsion system. So you've got some kind of a nuclear reactor that's providing power, and you've got some electric thrusters that you're using to put momentum into the vehicle. And so we kind of envision this type of an architecture. You're talking about power ranges that are, when you have humans involved, power ranges that are in the megawatt category, right? 2 to 50 megawatts. And to just kind of put that in context, right? 2 megawatts is like if you sat at a railroad tracks and watched a train go by, a single locomotive is about 2 to 3 megawatts worth of power. So that maybe helps you get a mental picture of what we're talking about when we say a couple of megawatts. Now, what this enables, right, is having nuclear electric propulsion, where you've got a persistent power source connected to some type of form of electric propulsion that has specific impulses that are measured in thousands of seconds. You can have human exploration of the outer solar system, and you can also enable some interstellar precursors. In the literature, there's been a number of papers that have been produced to talk about different types of interstellar precursor missions, one of which is the 1000 AU mission that was penned by JPL a couple decades ago. Now, a AU, or astronomical unit, that is the distance from the Earth to the sun. So that's like if you think of that as a measuring stick and you add that up 1,000 times, that's what 1000 AU is. So in that first swim lane, fission is going to be based on known physics and known engineering. Now this middle swim lane we call fusion. This is where we would potentially just replace, in this first little cartoon, we would replace the persistent power source with, say, some kind of a fusion reactor that has the capacity to provide electrical power to some similar set of electric propulsion systems that have high specific impulse. Alternately, you could also have a direct fusion scenario, right, where you just, in effect, the fusion process itself puts kinetic energy into the exhaust gases, and it's almost like, imagine it's an open fusion reactor, and so that's the way to also generate thrust when you don't have any kind of power conversion process. Now, by moving into this category, certainly you're increasing the potential power level, getting into an appreciable fraction potentially of a gigawatt. So you're talking about a lot more locomotives when you're looking at this, and this would potentially enable faster human exploration of the outer solar system. And for folks that might be familiar, in the literature, a lot of the historical studies looking at doing interstellar missions to places like Bernard Star or some of our other stellar neighbors, some of those concepts have been solidly based on the principle of using fusion propulsion to try and cover those distances. Now, in an appreciable fraction of a century, if you will. So this is like many, many decades at a minimum to try and get from our solar systems to some other solar system if you're trying to use this fusion propulsion approach. But it is, this is known physics. We understand the physics associated with this, and it's just a matter of unknown engineering to try and understand how do we kind of reduce this to practice. And I think we actually are making good progress. It may be a little closer than some people may think, at least in terms of seeing something, a fusion reactor in a terrestrial application, if you will. And I've always kind of had a mindset, I think we'll probably have fusion first as a terrestrial power source before we see it in this application. But it's something we need to pursue because this is something that helps us address this grand challenge. Now in this third swim lane, we've got what we call breakthrough. And this is where we're trying to do work on the frontiers of physics. So this is solidly in the domain of the engineering is unknown and the physics is unknown. And we're trying to work around the frontiers of physics to see if we can figure out if there's some opportunities to kind of do some things technologically that are clever and useful. I was talking with Ken before the meeting started, and you know, maybe a way to kind of visualize the frontiers of physics, if you will. You've got, from a Venn diagram perspective, you've essentially got two circles that are separated. And in one circle, you might have the word quantum mechanics, and that represents the standard model of the microscopic realm. And then in another circle, you might have the words general relativity, and that represents the standard model for the macroscopic world. And so both of those are you know, very robust models, physics models that we use in all different types of day-to-day scenarios, but they don't touch, right? They don't intersect. So that tells us as physicists that there has to be some more generalized understanding that would potentially encapsulate parts of those models or all of those models. And so in the process of trying to uncover and decode the mathematics that would explain what that more generalized physics model or physics models would be, can we come up with clever ways to do things that might help with this this objective of trying to establish the ability to go incredibly fast. And so just to throw some specific words to that, things like space drives, are there ways for us to interact with the vacuum, if you will? I think Arthur C. Clarke used a phrase in one of his books, quantum vacuum ramjet. It's a very descriptive term. Can we push off of the fabric of space-time, if you will, in some way to generate momentum and move our spacecraft meaningfully from one location to another? And then we know from general relativity, there are these mathematical things called wormholes and space warps. Are there ways for us to potentially do things to satisfy the field equations that that tell us what's necessary to make something like this manifest? So in the process of uncovering those more generalized physics models, can we potentially find ways to do things like this that help us do things even better than what the first two swim lanes might do? So the power level for this is probably going to be, you know, well in excess of anything we've talked about with fission or fusion, and certainly it has the potential to enable fast interstellar. So that's a very important focus in trying to think about this. This gives you a snapshot of the programs that we have here at Limitless Space Institute. We're very much interested in R&D because that's really what's necessary to try and make progress in this domain. And so there's a heavy emphasis on trying to conduct research and development internally. You know, we're continuing the work at EagleWorks Laboratories. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things we specifically have going on right now. And then we have a program called the Interstellar Initiative Grants. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's where we will be directly sponsoring external research and development from some external entities that have some very interesting ideas that we wanted to select and fund. In addition to that, we have the intention to conduct collaborative research and development through university partnerships, talking to different universities that have similar interests to us, and are there ways that we can potentially join arms and work together on some common areas of interest as they trace to this objective of trying to be able to go incredibly fast. Certainly, we want to engage students through this whole process. We will be, of course, hosting interns, graduate students, and engaging with postdocs. At some point, probably in the next 12 months, we'll start commissioning some work to develop some actual course material in the form of some, you know, summer seminars that might be a week or two with different target audiences, whether it's high school students or even teachers trying to figure out ways to maybe integrate this type of some of this type of material into their physics and science classes. And eventually, we'd really like to maybe realize a longer, full semester long type of course that could be considered as graduate study, independent graduate study that would be recognized by partner universities that we would sign memorandums of understanding with. And of course, education outreach, where we want to do continued speaking engagements to talk to people and try and help them understand, you know, what's currently going on, what are some of the physics pinch points, and what are some of the things that we're doing, and how can other people maybe get involved as they grow up in their studies, and what kind of disciplines can they engage in that might help them find ways to eventually be able to contribute, maybe first as an avocation and eventually as a vocation. This next slide, because of COVID, we were not able to host a student here at LSI. But we did want to do something to engage with students. So we partnered with the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop, and we partnered with the Initiative for Interstellar Studies organization to conduct a student paper contest. The specific question we asked students to address was why human exploration of the outer solar system and onto the stars. And so they were allowed to submit 2-page narratives of any kind of format that they wanted. And then we went together as a group and reviewed all the inputs, and then announced some of the winners, and they got some nice little cash awards for their effort in trying to address the question. And we've posted their papers online at our website. So if you want to go to limitlessspace.org, you can navigate through to the student section, and we'll have a web page where you can click their individual names and you can see the submissions that they gave to us. A lot of those are very, very clever, very interesting. It was neat to see their perspective at thinking about that question, right? That's a question I'm sure we all think about in some capacity or another, right? It's a very powerful thing to think about. So now I'll switch gears and talk about Interstellar Initiative grants. This is where we're funding external research with some external organizations. Again, trying to enable human exploration of the outer solar system and the stars requires that there be work done in trying to develop more capable power and propulsion systems. And so to try and help support that directly, we instituted this grant process, this biennial grant effort. We released a solicitation on May 1st, and then went through a competitive process where we accepted proposals from folks in the community. And this was a global call. It was not restricted in terms of location or anything. And so we got a lot of very good proposals submitted. They had 2 kind of categories that they were allowed to try and construct some proposals around. One category is what we would call tactical grant. And so that was meant to be less than $100,000, less than or equal to $100,000. And this is more in the category of a paper study doing some numerical analysis, probably not empirical in the lab, unless somebody just happened to have a very mature program that they already had strong cost sharing on. And then the other category was a strategic grant. And so the strategic grant is where we wanted to facilitate people doing work in the lab. So we wanted to increase the amount of resources up to the 250K maximum range. We did partner with Breakthrough Initiatives on this. They are going to help with travel costs for the different meetings that we'll have. We'll have 3 meetings associated with the execution of these grants. We're going to have a kickoff, a midterm, and then a final symposium meeting where we do the outbriefs of all the findings. And then Texas A&M is partnering with us to do the contract administration and enforcement of the grants. So we announced all the winners on September 1st, so just a couple weeks ago. And there's a press release. You can Google it, or you can just go to our website. We also have all those listed there. I'll go through them. We picked 9 winners, and so I'll go through the 9 different grants that we selected out of all the submissions to give you an idea of what these guys and folks will be doing here in the coming months. So the one proposal was associated with beamed energy propulsion. So this might be viewed as something related to nuclear electric propulsion, if you will, with the one provision that the power source is on the ground and it beams the power to a spacecraft that has some type of tailored photovoltaic array coupled to whatever frequency of the power beaming station you have on the ground. It's beaming that power in a focus beam to the spacecraft. and then converting that power into, putting it into the electric thrusters to generate thrust. Alternately, power beaming is also potentially the mechanism behind breakthrough starshot, right? You could potentially use some power beaming station on the ground to provide power to push a solar sail. And so I think that's part of the reference mission for breakthrough starshot, having that relativistic sail that can go very fast. So, but having a power beaming station has multiple applications, and there are actually also some near-term applications as well. So what Professor Phil Lubin from UC Santa Barbara wants to do is he wants to do some work with some field tests with some sparse phased arrays, and he also wants to look at developing some type of a lunar payload to go on one of the CLIPS landers where they could potentially conduct an experiment with approximately, I think, about a 10-meter diameter power beaming station, doing some phase locking with a spacecraft on the surface of the moon, and then beaming some power to the surface of the moon. Now, it's because of the small size of the source, the footprint will be fairly spread out. And so you kind of see from that little picture on the bottom there, there are those little red dots, and those are meant to insinuate kind of the hot spots on the moon as a result of some kind of a 10-meter array. And there would be an infrared camera that would kind of see that. And so the growth path for that would, as that array gets bigger, they could eventually get more focused power and maybe provide keep alive power for lunar vehicles on the surface of the moon during the lunar night. So 15 days worth of dark means you have to have a pretty big battery or some alternate form to generate power. Next one, we have a fusion propulsion concept from Professor Ray Sedgwick at University of Maryland. It's a centrifugal confinement process. So he's using crossed electric and magnetic fields to create this confinement process. And the interesting thing about this is a DT plasma, but he's more interested in trying to utilize the alpha particles as they come out of the loss cone from the front end and the back end of the fusion reactor. The stuff that goes out the front end, they would use to generate power through a direct energy conversion process. And in the back, they use it to help increase the kinetic energy of a bypass propellant. So you have a high thrust, reasonable specific impulse fusion propulsion system. We have another fusion propulsion proposal that we funded from Professor Jason Casabry at University of Alabama, Huntsville. His specific concept is a pulsed fusion approach, kind of in a lower energy regime. So you see from the little puddle plots there on the left, let me move my mouse in here where you can see these puddle plots. These lines represent the coefficient of performance, physics coefficient of performance of 1 for the fusion. So if you can be in this left regime with your pulsed system, then you'll potentially be in the domain of realizing a coefficient of performance of 1 for your system. So they want to go through and conduct some tests to work with some targets that are filled with heavy water or lithium deuteride and see how well they can pulse this system so that they can collect data points in this regime. So that's going to be an interesting project to follow. Another fusion concept, the PI here is Kelvin Long from the Interstellar Research Center. This is going to be a software suite that will integrate a fairly rigorous model to study or to model the ignition of fuel pellets for inertial confinement fusion, and then coupled to trying to understand, the integrated spacecraft performance and how it behaves in terms of the mission profile and performance. So this will allow us to assess new concepts with a little bit more rigor than has been able to be done in the past, number one. Number two, we will potentially be able to use this type of a tool to look at some of the historical concepts and see if there were, see how accurate they were with this next level of detail in this software suite. And then this is the final fusion one that we've got in our inaugural class of nine awardees. This is an interesting concept, a fusion concept developed by Helicity Space. The PI is Dr. Sethavian Yu. This particular fusion propulsion system, if you notice here on the right, if you can see my mouse, this is called like a plasma plectoneme. So that's kind of like a helical DNA type of structure, if you will. So the plasma is forming this spiraled set of plasma tendrils. And so the concept of operation in their fusion propulsion system is they have multiple sources of plasma plectonemes that they then inject, and in the process of those plectonemes combining, the magnetic recombination heats the plasma, and then there is an external magnetic field. They use the term peristaltic magnetic nozzle. So it's, peristaltic is the if you think about the pumps that pump blood for a heart patient or something, there's just a tube with a little cog that goes through and squeezes that tube and pushes the fluid forward. So in the same way, this magnetic field is pulsed in such a way that as these sources provide the plasma source, it will compress it and help initiate a higher quality fusion process and ideally generate higher thrust. So this is, they have a number of external partners as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do. Caltech is on their team, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. This next proposal is a solar sail proposal. The principal investigator is Dr. Richard Norty from Delft University of Technology over in the Netherlands. Again, the breakthrough starshot concept requires a solar sail that is has a very, very low aerial density. So it's super light, number one. Number two, it also has to be highly reflective over a fairly non-trivial bandwidth of light. If you accelerate a sail to an appreciable fraction of the speed of light, there's going to be a relativistic shift. And so if you have an optical surface that is tailored for a very narrow bandwidth of light, as it accelerates in speed relative to some power beaming ground station, it will become less effective. And instead of being as reflective as it needs to be and have the qualities, it would potentially get to a range where it might damage the sail and the system would not work that well. So Richard and his team at Delft University, they've done two things. They've championed the process of working with photonic crystals that you can achieve very, very lightweight sails. And they've not only can they make lightweight sails, they can make them fairly large. You see in the little picture here, let's see, where's my mouse? You see in the picture here, there's a very, very small version that used to be the maximum size one could make, and they've championed the process to make them macroscopic. I mean, that's 4.5 centimeter square there. And then they're also working on making these sail structures so that there's these little structures that can be popped, hence the term origami, can be popped up out of plane, so that this sail can do two things. It can potentially respond to polarized light to spin it, if you will, number one. Number two, having this type of structure will allow your system to tolerate a larger bandwidth of source light. Next up we have, this is what I would categorize as a space drive proposal. This is by Professor John Bush at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's working with developing a hydrodynamic quantum field theory. This is kind of a pilot wave physics model. We'll talk a little bit more about pilot waves in a second. But in Professor Bush's point of view, right, there's some kind of underlying wave medium that's at the root cause of some of the quantum behavior that we observe. And so in the process of trying to develop a better understanding of this is that frontiers of physics type of thing. In the process of trying to develop a better understanding of this, can we find ways to impart momentum on that medium and allow us to actually generate some tractable thrusting against this background medium? So he's going to be doing some three-dimensional work. Specifically, he wants to expand some of his modeling into the relativistic domain by looking at the Klein-Gordon equation. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with over the next 12 months. This next one here is another space drive proposal from Charles Chase at Unlab, along with a partnership with the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. This is also an approach trying to study the characteristics of the quantum vacuum fluctuations and how they interact with some asymmetric potentials. They've done some early analysis that suggests you can generate a propulsive force based on how you construct these types of asymmetric potentials. So they want to investigate some of the materials that you can use, and are there some specific structures that you can make that might make this of an appreciable size that might be of interest for some kind of a space application. So again, this is another one that would definitely fit in the kind of the frontiers of physics category, if you will. And finally, we have a proposal from Professor Remo Garatini at University of Bergamo over in Italy. This is dealing with wormholes. He wants to study ways to try and enhance the Casimir energy density that can be realized by studying some of his mathematical work that suggests you can augment the magnitude of that with superconductors and having multiple plates. And he also wants to look at some different mathematical profiles to see if you can come up with a more efficient way to mathematically construct something like this. So again, very much in the frontiers of physics, just trying to maybe move the needle a little bit in the theoretical domain. So that is our inaugural class of Interstellar Initiative grant winners. So we're excited to be able to fund those guys to do that work. It'll be really neat to see how that progresses, and we'll try and make that as available for everyone as we possibly can. So maybe keep checking back on our website on that. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about some of the work that we're doing internally at Limitless Space Institute. Through our EagleWorks laboratories. So currently we're very involved with a DARPA grant that we're working on. It's a 18-month grant. We're partnered with Texas A&M and Isentis to try and go through and do some work with our dynamic vacuum model. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. This little picture that you see here, it's got several different Casimir cavity structures. If you'll look at some of the dimensions here, these are very, very small. This is a 4 micrometer gap here for a couple of plates that are 40 microns by 40 microns. And then you see this little red pillar structure here that's in the center. I'll talk a little bit more about each one of these things in just a second. But our dynamic vacuum model suggests that there may be some value in trying to construct these customized Casimir cavities and conducting some experiments to try and study some of the predicted characteristics from our dynamic vacuum model, and we'll talk about that in just a few slides. So we've actually had a lot of good success with the development of the dynamic vacuum model, done a lot of work modeling the hydrogen atom. We've expanded our modeling techniques to also look at molecular hydrogen. We've spent a little bit of time trying to model the proton directly. We've actually done a little bit of work trying to understand gravity. Remember I said at the beginning, you've got, from a Venn diagram perspective, you've got two circles with two standard models, if you will. The standard model of the microscopic, which is quantum mechanics, and then the standard model of the macroscopic, which is general relativity, and they don't touch. And so we think that there's this potential for a more generalized understanding that may overlap those two in some way. And we think, based on what we found with some of the results from our dynamic vacuum model, it may be some such a model that might be encapsulating a bit of both of those circles from a Venn diagram perspective. So now we'll really get into some of the gritty details of our dynamic vacuum model. Our viewpoint, to kind of keep it simple to start with, we think that the quantum vacuum is a dynamic medium. It's the parlance dynamic vacuum. Somebody's off mute. Does somebody have a question? Oh, sorry. I thought you had a question, Ken. So our viewpoint is the quantum vacuum is a dynamic medium. So it can support spatial and temporal variations. And when this is the case, this quantum vacuum medium can support longitudinal wave modes. And this is important from the standpoint that if this is true, then the internal constituents of this medium are capable of interacting and exchanging momentum with one another. That's actually very important if you want to talk about the viability of the concept of a space drive. But more importantly, just from the pure science perspective, you know, we think that acoustic resonances in the quantum vacuum are directly responsible for atomic structure. So let me say that a different way. What we're saying when we make that claim is the s orbital, the primary quantum numbers, the spherical probability distribution that you might be familiar from university physics. The s orbital, the p orbital, the d orbital, the f orbital, those are all acoustic resonances. And the probability density that we typically think of is in effect a normalized pressure tensor. And so we think this dynamic vacuum model may be providing us a more fundamental understanding of what may be going on. And we'll talk more about this in the next 2 or 3 slides. Now, in terms of how do we fit into the history of different physics ideas that have been considered in the past, we would fall into the dynamic vacuum model would fall into the non-local hidden variable theory category, or a pilot wave theory. And so a pilot wave theory is, there are a number of them. Pilot wave theories are a family of realist interpretations of quantum mechanics. The Copenhagen interpretation is the dominant point of view of physics today. And the Copenhagen interpretation would maintain that at the microscopic level, reality is not real, it's probabilistic. Whereas a pilot wave interpretation maintains that at the microscopic level, reality is real. Microscopic particles follow real trajectories over time, just like larger classical bodies do. And this stochasticity that we see in our measurements is just a result of an ignorance of a more fundamental understanding of a dynamic system that exists underneath that. Now, that little video that was playing in the background, I'm going to start it again. This is a video that was put together by John Bush dealing with something called walking droplets. And so this is what you're seeing is a bath of silicon oil. And that little droplet you see there is smaller than a millimeter. And this particular experiment has a cylindrical region in the silicon oil bath that's a little deeper. And that whole tray is vibrating at about 60 to 70 hertz. So just below the Faraday frequency, so that that droplet doesn't recombine when it's bouncing. Now, if you look at the droplet from overhead and you colorize its path based on its speed, you can tell where the droplet wants to be and where it doesn't want to be. And while individually the path looks chaotic, over the long period of time, it actually generates a probability distribution that matches that of an electron trapped in a quantum corral. So here you have a large macroscopic system, a large macroscopic classical system manifesting something that typically gets thought of only in the context of the probabilistic domain of quantum mechanics. So walking droplets have actually, I think, generated a lot of interest in pilot waves. And if you're so inclined, you may enjoy Googling walking droplets. There's a bunch of very neat videos that have been put together by universities all across the world that are interested in this particular domain, because it provides a whole new way to look at things that we typically had only thought of being something that you could see mathematically. But they've been able to duplicate all kinds of things, quantized orbits, double slit tunneling. It's really neat. You should spend some time looking at it. And independent of anything we're talking about here, it's very satisfying. Okay, so now we'll talk specifically about some of the work we did associated with the DARPA grant we had in 2018 and 2019. In this particular grant, we did some work developing just the theoretical model in addition to some empirical work we were doing. And we wanted to go through the process of trying to develop a formal and rigorous mathematical derivation of the acoustic wave equation from the Schrodinger equation, right? In a previous slide, a couple slides ago, I said we maintain that acoustic resonances are directly responsible for atomic structure. They are atomic structure. And so the probability density that we typically think of is just an abstracted view of that. So we think that the acoustic resonance is a more fundamental understanding of what an electron orbital is. And so we went through the process of deriving the acoustic wave equation from Schrodinger. Now, I'm not going to go through this in full detail. There's a nice paper published in Physics Open if you really want to get into the details. But I do want to highlight just a couple of bits and pieces of the story. I think they're interesting, just anecdotally, in terms of some of the different debates that are ongoing today, in terms of Copenhagen versus pilot wave versus many worlds, in terms of lots of different discussions that go on. So the way you derive the acoustic wave equations, we actually take a couple of shortcuts through some work that was done back in 1929. And the first thing we do is we derive the Madelung equations. And so we take the Schrodinger equation and we put it into polar form. So you see this is the traditional form of the Schrodinger equation. We introduce this coordinate system transformation. And then we go through, we then go through the process of separating it into real and imaginary parts. And so we've got these two equations right here, where you've got this one term right here, this del squared r over r. And so this is a curvature term in the amplitude of the wave equation. And that's in the historical literature, what is identified as the quantum potential Q. Now, whether you like pilot wave or not, the interesting thing to me is that the quantum potential Q is just mathematically manifest just by making this coordinate system transformation. So it's interesting to me to see that there's really, there's nothing exotic that was done from this point to that point. And then the quantum potential is mathematically explicit in this set of equations. Now I think I see a question that just came in. How do you bypass Bell's theorem from Todd Strauss? It's interesting, John Bell was very, very interested in the pilot wave theory, and he maintained that the Copenhagen interpretation and the pilot wave interpretation should be taught right alongside one another. And John Bell actually really found a lot of elegance in the principle of the pilot wave, and that's what actually motivated him to get into the whole process of developing Bell's theorem. So I think when you get into Bell's theorem, that gets into the whole concept of locality, if you will. And so that's where you heard me use the very specific terminology at the beginning of this non-local hidden variables theory. And so there's a bifurcation point that's involved by using that specific term. When you look at the quantum potential, quantum potential Q is non-local. It's interesting. There's some neat work that John Bush has published in the last 8 months dealing with quantum entanglement in the context of the pilot wave formalism. So that's definitely an area of active investigation, trying to understand what does that look like? What are the physics specifics behind the concept of entanglement? And how do you understand that? Are there some potential ways for us to utilize that? So proceeding on here, I'll kind of skim through some of the next slides. I don't want to belabor the mathematical detail here, but we in effect, once we get the Madelung equations, we follow a very traditional process to get to the acoustic wave equation. This is all just standard assumptions that get made in the process of trying to deduce, what is the acoustic wave equation for a system that you're studying. And in the process of doing this, you can realize the traditional form of the acoustic wave equation. Now, what this does, right, is this then allows us to say, what are the resonances of this system? What are the eigenfrequencies of this system? And specifically, when you ask something like that, that means you have to, if a system is able to manifest acoustic resonances, and you have to provide a density field and a velocity field for that medium. So that's an important implication of having been able to derive the acoustic wave equation from the Schrodinger equation. So here we've got, we go through and derive the density field for the hydrogen atom. This is some work we did in 2019. We actually had a a heuristic model that we derived in 2015 in a paper that we published in the Journal of Modern Physics. But what we wanted to do here was come up with a more rigorous derivation of the density field. So here you see a plot of the density field and the velocity field that we put into COMSOL, and we modeled solve for the eigenfrequencies of the system. And so you see the acoustic resonances that are equivalent to the 1s state all the way through to the 7s state. And these are the primary quantum numbers. And you can compare the frequency we found from COMSOL versus what one would expect from the traditional approach. We actually get some very close predictions for these eigenfrequencies. Now, as I said, we also show the other structure, the P, D, and F orbitals. Those are also just acoustic resonances in the system. And I think that the interesting thing from a quantization perspective, when you look at a frequency response curve for this type of a system, this system is only going to resonate at a specific frequency. The frequency response curve is very, very nonlinear, and it has a very, very, very tight, in effect, quality factor, if you will. It's a very, very narrow well where the system can resonate. So if you try to interact with the system in any way that's outside of a specific frequency range of what its frequency response curve says that it can operate in, it's just not going to interact, right? So any other state besides those frequencies will never be able to exist. They won't manifest. So this provides a slightly different thought process on the origin of quantization, if you will. As I said, we wanted to expand our modeling approach to also look at molecules. So we looked at the most simplistic molecule we could find, and we built a model for the hydrogen molecule. And so here you see a density field and a velocity field for the hydrogen molecule. And when we modeled this in COMSOL to look at the frequencies, this is the frequency response curve for the system. Is this my process of investigating an advanced technology? Not quite sure I understand the exact intent of that. This is going to get to, so let me take a stab at that. In order to try and come up with some kind of a power and propulsion concept, if you're going to work within the domain of breakthrough, you have to spend a lot more time working in fundamental science first to try and understand the mathematics and how that might be eventually used to develop some technology. So we'll talk about some potential technological embodiments as a result of this underlying physics. I think it's really important to try and understand the physics first before we get to it. So I hope that answered your question, Mark, or at least until we can get to a chance we can talk more in more detail. But I have some more slides that I think that are more application oriented here in the future. So this goes through and shows the frequency response curve for molecular hydrogen, and we predict frequencies that are very, very close to observation. So this is continuing to give us confidence that our dynamic vacuum model may actually have some very strong predictive capabilities. So if it makes predictive capabilities, Mark, if it makes predictive capabilities for some technology that may have power and propulsion implications, we can have stronger confidence that we may see some of the observables we're predicting with this model. Now here's some work we did trying to model the proton. We took a Wood-Saxon potential and we converted it to a density field and a velocity field. We had two separate models that we created. And then we looked at the acoustic resonances for this system, and we compared. So the frequencies are just about dead on with what you would expect. And the interesting thing is qualitatively, the distribution, the pressure distribution from our numerical modeling is somewhat similar to some results that were published in 2019 using lattice quantum chromodynamics analysis. You see there's this negative pressure, confining pressure on the outside of the proton, and we have a very similar feature in both of the results of our models. So what, who cares? This is all science, right? What does this have to do with what we're trying to think about? The derivation of the acoustic wave equation from Schrodinger, in our view, clearly shows that electron orbitals can be viewed as acoustic resonances. So that's no longer just a hand-wavy statement. We have a rigorous derivation of the acoustic wave equation from Schrodinger. So we think that that's a much more defensible statement. Specifically, an acoustic oscillation requires these spatial and temporal variations for the media in the medium for them to be manifest. So that means we have to specify a density field and a velocity field for the system to be able to solve. So all this to say, remember I said from a Venn diagram perspective, there are these two circles today that are separated, and we think that there may be some value in trying to uncover this more generalized theory. And so we think, based on some of these types of results, our viewpoint in terms of the dynamic vacuum model versus a Copenhagen viewpoint, instead of being a ontological discussion, we think it's an epistemological discussion. Specifically, ontological means there's no difference. They're just different mathematical interpretations, but they don't make any different predictions from one another. But in this case, they do, because we're actually required to input a density field and a velocity field. And so that's not something that you would be allowed to do or propose within the context of the Copenhagen interpretation. Now, this is just a little short aside, again, to try and substantiate the viewpoint that we have, that we think that the dynamic vacuum model is potentially the beginning pieces of a more generalized theory that may encapsulate not only quantum mechanics, but start to reach over into general relativity. We think gravity is an emergent phenomenon. Specifically, the acceleration vector that we perceive as associated with the gravitational field is a hydrostatic pressure gradient in this dynamic vacuum. And so as part of the work we were doing for DARPA, we constructed a density field and a velocity field for the sun's gravitational force, and constructed a solar system-wide model. It's fairly large and took a long time to solve, but in the process of constructing this model, the geometry of it, the density field and the velocity field, and then setting up the ability to go through and perturb the system to look at the eigenfrequencies, we were able to then go through and look at the eigenfrequencies most closely associated with the known planetary orbits. And so you see, these are the acoustic resonances associated with Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Ceres, and then you've got the outer solar system going out to Pluto. And if we compare the frequencies that ComSol predicts versus the observation, you can see from our 2018 model, these are all fairly close to observation. You can see the frequency response curves for the individual planetary orbits. We've been doing some recent updates to the model, and we have a new set of results that we just finished with in June, where we've improved the modeling approach. And so some of the errors have become slightly smaller. What we're trying to do is we're trying to go through, and again, this is just science at this point. What we want to do is we want to develop a frequency response curve for the entire solar system. And can we potentially use that type of a modeling technique to help in the process of detecting exoplanets? So if orbits have this tendency to be soft quantized, this is something new. This is something that's not predicted exclusively from general relativity, and this would be potentially a new insight as a result of this more fundamental model that may be overlapping part of general relativity. And could we then potentially use this to show that when you look at other stars to try and find exoplanets, we can use this technique to tell the algorithms which frequency bands to look in to try and find evidence of some type of exoplanet. So that's part of the motivation for continuing the development of this model. But it does require a lot of computational capability. This requires computer cluster capability. Now we're getting into some of the application. This is a little bit of a prologue before we get into the test articles we're looking at. How do we think this dynamic vacuum model could potentially be used in some power and propulsion applications? And so the first part of this story was we discovered an intersection with the Casimir phenomenon back in 2015 when we were first studying the hydrogen atom. The density field has a 1/r⁴ dependency. And so that spatial dependency made us think of the Casimir force. And in the process of going through and calculating the average density predicted in the vacuum around the hydrogen atom, and then imagining for a moment that there were a virtual Casimir cavity whose plates were separated by twice the distance of the radius of whatever primary quantum number we were looking at. So you've got a Casimir cavity that's the diameter of the primary quantum number you're looking at. We can calculate a predicted density in the quantum vacuum as a result of the Casimir cavity and compare that to the average density predicted to exist around the hydrogen atom from our model. And so when you look at that for all the primary quantum numbers for n is equal to 1 to n is equal to 7, we found that those values were all within basically a factor of 3 of one another for all of those conditions. So what this told us at the time is that the atom may be viewed as an analog for a Casimir cavity, if you will. We didn't think of any applications as a result of that at that time, but that was just something we were thinking about. Could the atom be considered an analog for the Casimir cavity? Now, the important distinction was we didn't think about the reverse of that. Can the Casimir cavity be considered an analog for an atomic system in that there is structure in the negative vacuum energy state that exists between those two plates? When you look at the equation for the Casimir force, it predicts a perturbation to the quantum vacuum energy density that exists between those two plates. And oftentimes it's just typically viewed as being this isotropic distribution of negative vacuum energy density. But if it is indeed an analog for the atom, then there's structure to it. And so if there's structure to it, then that may provide the possibility of detecting some additional things that we had not typically thought of when we just simply treat the Casimir cavity using the simplistic equation that we typically use. So in the process of trying to look at things the other way, looking at the Casimir cavity as an analog for the hydrogen atom, we went through the process of trying to derive an understanding of what that distribution would be and what some of the implications of that distribution would be. And so we think that this structure manifests a very tiny but non-zero electric field as a result of polarization of vacuum fluctuations inside the Casimir cavity. And so you see the little equation that we derived there that gives a prediction for the variation of the electric field originating at the symmetry midpoint between the two grounded plates on the outside edge. There's going to be this non-zero field that goes out to the plates on the edge. Again, it's very small, but it's something that's not predicted from the traditional treatment of the Casimir cavity. So that led us to go through the process of trying to figure out, can we construct some Casimir cavities that would manifest a signal of an appropriate magnitude that we could detect? And so now you're seeing those four little Casimir cavity cartoon concepts I showed you at the beginning of this discussion. This shows this is a traditional parallel Casimir cavity with these this little pillar structure that's in the middle. They would be on separate channels. The two gold plates would be grounded, and then the pillars that are in the center would be channelized so that you could potentially query if they're measuring any kind of non-zero electric field as a result of this structure that's in the quantum vacuum. Based on the size of these cavities, with a single cavity, we would predict at 4 microns with this 40 by 40 micron, we would measure about 0.7 millivolts, but we would only measure it for 0.2 microseconds. And this is with a 10 mega ohm oscilloscope. So we need to actually have a large number of these that we could use to try and measure a voltage signal that would exist a little bit longer to a level that might be compatible with some of the instrumentation we try and use. So by having about 5,000, we could potentially measure this non-zero voltage for right about a millisecond. And so the motivation for this experiment is just to try and go through and understand if our predicted structure is indeed there. The next slide shows if we did a slight perturbation of that experiment where we allowed one of the two plates to actually move We tried to go through and measure the force. You see a little cartoon there of a Casimir cavity experiment approach that was designed by some folks at MIT, where we could go through and you see this little red line and this blue line that represents the Casimir cavity. We could potentially augment this type of a design by having some pillars, channelized pillars in between that gap that we could then energize with some kind of a power source to a slightly higher value than what would be predicted for the cavity without any external driving. And we could potentially increase the magnitude of the Casimir force. And so if we double the voltage from the 0.7 millivolts to 1.4 millivolts, then that would predict that the Casimir force might increase by a factor of 4. And so what this is potentially giving us a mechanism to do is a way to increase the magnitude of the negative vacuum energy density that might be manifest in this cavity. And so that's certainly of interest for a number of applications. Specifically, if you ever want to talk about the idea of a space warp or a wormhole, you have to have exotic matter or negative vacuum energy density to make some kind of trick like that ever even remotely possible, let alone feasible. And so if we had some way to try and increase the magnitude of the negative vacuum energy density, that might be useful to know and understand. Now, if we go through and take that tapered cavity, take the straight cavity and we make it a tapered cavity so that there's about a 7 micron separation at one end, maintaining the 4 micron separation at the front end. If we apply an external voltage pulse to these pillars, then it will potentially generate a longitudinal wave pulse coming out of the tapered cavity. Now, this would potentially generate a force, but it is a very, very tiny force. As you can see from the numbers there, we would really have no hope of trying to measure that. And I think maybe even if we ganged a number of these together into a wafer, we still would never be able to measure the force. This is for something of this type of distribution with applying 40 millivolts and about 250 milliamps to the entire chip. This would only generate about 33 piconewtons of force, and the newtons per kilowatt. This is just a photon rocket, so this is not a very useful form of propulsion. But if we were able to energize this chip with a voltage pulse and then measure the transit of that longitudinal wave pulse through a downstream chip, this would potentially be a great experiment to show proof that one could generate and detect longitudinal wave pulses. And so that may have a number of interesting applications. Now, if we did want to try and get the force up to a value that may be of interest for some type of an in-space propulsion application, if we apply an external magnetic field of an appropriate magnitude, so about 0.2 Tesla, 2000 Gauss, if you will, that same system, you increase the magnitude of the force on the individual cavity basis, a good number of order of magnitude, several orders of magnitude, but specifically the newtons per kilowatt get to a point where this is something that's maybe of interest for some type of an in-space propulsion system. So here you see a little 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter chip populated with many thousand of these Casimir cavity arrays. And this would generate 30 nanonewtons instead of piconewtons with the same input voltage and current. But the newtons per kilowatt is about 0.003 newtons per kilowatt. So this is about an order of magnitude below a Hall thruster. So this is at least getting in the same zip code as some of the current forms of electric propulsion that we use today. Now this shows a snapshot of some of the nanofabrication work that we've been doing. Our partners, Isentis, are using the MIT MTL lab to go through and try and manufacture those cavities that we're talking about. And so here you see some snapshots of some of the results of trying to understand how reliably can we generate these high aspect ratio, very deep and large cross-sectional area features in a silicon wafer. You see this is like a map of the grayscale masking that we want to do. These etches here, we currently are not doing the grayscale matching on these. We just wanted to try and understand the operation of the machine, how to get plates that were smooth sides and did not have scallops. So the first thing we're trying to do is show that we can get the three separate geometric features formed reliably close to the size that we're trying to get. So this shows some of the recent work. The thickness of these walls are about 3/4 of a micrometer. And then these walls here are about 1/2 of a micron. So these are fairly small. And then on the bottom, you see the work that's being done by Texas A&M in their nanofabrication facility. They have a nanoscribe 3D printer, and they're trying to go through and do 3D printing of some of the geometric features that we're trying to work on. And we're also working on the manufacturing process to metallize these structures after we're done 3D printing them. And so that we're actually making good progress there as well in terms of metallizing them. And then just for fun, I got a picture of a paramecium to help you see 20 microns. I think with some of the stuff that we're doing, we could probably give this paramecium a pretty cool looking tattoo. So this goes through and shows some of the modeling that we've been doing. Interesting, in the process of doing the literature search for our DARPA grant, we came across some numerical modeling that was developed in the late 2000s. This is in the context of quantum field theory, kind of adapting Feynman path integrals to try and study the predicted structure to the quantum vacuum that might exist in some type of a Casimir cavity or Casimir experiment. And so here you see on the top, there are a couple of things that are published in the literature. This is not our work. This is some work that's been done in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. Here you show, this is some results using this world line numerics approach to calculate the energy density distribution in a traditional parallel plate Casimir cavity. You see that this particular approach does indeed predict that there is this density variation that exists inside the Casimir cavities. That's a very interesting implication of this particular numerical technique. But this numerical technique is very, very powerful from the standpoint it can handle any kind of geometry you want to throw at it. It doesn't have a lot of restrictions in terms of what you're doing and how you do it. So it's very powerful in ways that PFA might not be. PFA is obviously a very favored technique because it has a lot of power if your geometry is simple. But when you get some complicated stuff, this particular approach is almost the more generalized preferred approach. This is a sphere plate. You see the predicted energy density distribution in the quantum vacuum. And I think one thing to highlight that people notice right away when they look at this is that this perturbation extends well out of what you might anticipate would be the region of interest. And even in the traditional Casimir cavity, right, this is extending out into free space. Now this problem right here, where you've got a blade plate, this particular approach, you can't use PFA for. PFA cannot assess this because of this orthogonal geometry, but you see the predicted energy density distribution. And so this is some results that were published in the literature for a plate and a sphere plate. So you've got a red line for the plate and then a black line for the sphere plate using this world line approach. And so when we compare, this is our results here using our numerical algorithms that we developed. When you compare them, we're in effect right on top of theirs, and we predict the exact Casimir force that you would expect for the plate-plate scenario. This little animation here shows, this is the important bit that kind of makes this work. This is a representation, a three-dimensional representation of a fluctuation of a scalar field. And so this is at the heart of this whole algorithm that you use to go try and deduce this structure that might exist across some kind of a spatial grid that you would map across something you're trying to model. And so you would have several thousand of these that you would scale across a frequency range and figure out how much does each scalar fluctuation add to the energy density that's predicted to exist at a particular point. And so this is an additional very useful tool that we've been eagerly developing alongside of our dynamic vacuum model because they predict very close to the same thing. So with that, I think that's everything I wanted to try and cover with you guys. I'll just finish with this cute little animation here, and and we can take some questions. All right, questions?
Hi, folks. If you have any question, you are welcome to raise hand. So let's see. Paul, you have any comments, question? I mean, oh, Mark has a question. Please, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just interesting, Sonny, to see what you guys been up to over the last couple of years. Do you have any notion as to where your Newton per first off, do you have a prototype of that Casimir cavity?
Do we have a prototype? Is that your question?
Yes.
So I showed you, let me go back to sharing again. All right.
The duck, yes.
Yeah, right. So in terms of prototypes, you see like the Casimir cavity stuff, this is what we're trying to make right now. So the purpose of the DARPA grant is to further develop the numerical models in parallel with what type of things can we actually reliably manufacture, because we are very much on the leading edge of nanofabrication with what we're doing. And so we're developing new techniques, right, in terms of how we're using nanoscribe 3D printing, metallization of surfaces, and some of these very high aspect ratio features that we're trying to realize in mass on a chip, and then allow for the channelization that we're trying to detect. So the primary purpose of the work, the funded work that we're doing is to do those two things in parallel. And then after the 18 months worth of work, maybe we will be well positioned to go through and execute a rigorous campaign.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mark, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is a kind of a related question, but it's more advanced, and it has to do with the space war. We heard about warping space, like you mentioned in the beginning of your talk. So the question is it possible to generate a space warp, which is like separating the electromagnetic field, so a null zone or a no EMF field exists inside the warp? And if it is, how would you go ahead and do that?
So I don't know if I fully understood your question, but I'm certainly familiar with the mathematics of the space warp. So maybe I can talk it from that perspective, and you can tell me if I'm in the right zip code with what you're asking me. So if you look at the Alcubierre metric, when you look at the required energy density distributions necessary to make the idea of a space warp work, when you solve the field equations, it requires a toroidal ring of energy density distribution that would be established around some kind of a spacecraft where the important bits might be the crew members or the instrumentation, whatever, the stuff that you want to protect from any tidal forces that might exist in the fenning region. But that toroidal ring is going to establish a warp bubble, if you will, around the spacecraft. And the inside of that warp bubble, you're going to have this spherical region of flat space-time, and then you'll have this ring of negative vacuum energy density that allows this spacecraft to go through and manifest this expansion and contraction of space in such a way that it can go, from here to Alpha Centauri in something potentially less than 4.3 light years, as measured by clocks on Earth, right? In order for a space warp to work, and there are lots of different models out there. That's why I'm coordinating on the Alcubierre metric. When you look at the Alcubierre metric, it requires this toroidal ring of negative vacuum energy density to be made manifest around a spacecraft to be able to make the trick work. Now, you could also argue you need to have something that goes 10 times the speed of light, or is something that goes half the speed of light also interesting, right? So to me, the whole concept of subluminal, a space warp that's subluminal is still very interesting, because that's pretty fast and maybe of interest as well. So I don't know. I'll hand the microphone back to you, Mark, and you can calibrate me.
No, that sort of covers it. It inside that warp, is that a no EMF field, or does the EMF exist within the warp?
I think, are you asking that if you could use EMF to generate it? I would not immediately anticipate that that's the direct approach that you would do.
Okay. Well, the idea is that there is the Einstein wall. You can't go faster than the speed of light, which is the electromagnetic field. So if you separate the electromagnetic field, then therefore you're not going to violate Einstein's rule of E equals mc squared. So the whole idea.
Yeah, I got you. Let me interrupt real quick, Mark. The beauty of the idea of a space warp is that locally you never exceed the speed of light, right? And that's the whole. Space-time can expand and contract at any speed that it wants. There is no speed limit to the expansion and contraction of space. And so that's the appeal of the idea of a space warp, is that it allows you to cover very large distances in very short periods of time without violating the constraints of general relativity, right? So that doesn't come into effect in the idea of an Alcubierre warp metric. You're not, locally, you never exceed the speed of light. I call that the 11th commandment of physics, thou shalt not exceed the speed of light, right? So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, Todd, Mr. Strauss, I saw you have a comment early. Do you want to say something?
No, I'm fine listening. This is a lot to take in, so I don't want to prematurely really say some things. Although you were talking about emergent gravity, and I don't know if you meant like with your models. I mean, can you also fulfill the predictions of general relativity, like the precession of Mercury, or maybe I'm not understanding what you're talking about with the emergent gravity. Are you saying that it does the same thing as the general relativity theory, and so you can predict like those like the precession of Mercury and bending of light and that kind of stuff?
Yes, yeah, in effect it would. So the model's still very early. So let me make sure I put this qualifier out. We are only in the very beginning phases of thinking about that. But certainly I understand general relativity to a large degree, and I understand some of the things that we need to go try and tackle. But some of the stuff that's even been done in the past, it kind of colors my thoughts as I try and figure out how we would unpack this model and try and mature it in that domain. It's very much, in my estimation, things like the curvature of space-time. These are optical properties of the medium, if you will, right? And so things like polarizable vacuum, some of the work that's been done in the past, that's probably going to influence some of my thought processes and how we try and manifest that. But I think certainly we're the first model to be able to come forward and go through and say, we think that if this conjecture is correct, and gravity is an emergent phenomena, then orbits may have this tendency to be soft quantities. Now, it's not the same thing as when you look at atomic orbital, where you've got very rigid and fixed quantizations of orbits, but you will still have this tendency for, when you're looking at a large system, things will tend to aggregate in certain zones as the dust cloud starts to coalesce into planets. Once certain planets form in certain locations, they're going to interact with one another and then sub-select certain sets of record grooves, if you will, in the frequency response curve, and then that's where the planets will tend to aggregate, if you will. So there's going to be this tendency for soft quantization, and so we think an interesting exercise to conduct would be to look at the exoplanet database and go through and look at the different star systems where we have found planets and see if our modeling will predict some of the same observed orbits that have been found for the exoplanets.
Okay, yeah, that's certainly interesting. Yeah, that's all I really have to comment on. It's sort of a lot to understand right now, but thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why we're waiting for a little bit more questions. Actually, I have, so a few years ago when we listened to Professor Lubin's talk, as you show using the, he was proposing using the wafers, for laser beam, for those kind of semiconductor, you say, is that you move in a very fast speed, close to maybe speed of light. But is there any kind of theory or data showing those materials will function like a band gap, or mechanical structure, so we remain the same performance as they were, in regular state?
So let me play back your question to make sure I understood it. So your question is in regards to Starshot, correct?
Yeah, and because you also mentioned about the cosmic effect using the chips, nano fabrication. And as you know, the silicon wafer, they're actually very fragile. So if you want to benefit the vacuum, then you generate certain power, and the goal, of course, eventually to benefit from it, and they eventually go for faster, speed. And but the performance of those materials, at that kind of speed, eventually, will they generate, like a mechanical structure or the band gap, electronic band gap structure inside the material like silicon, those things will remain the same as we think they will perform as in, like a low speed.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a couple questions that are encapsulated in your narrative, and so I'll try and answer both of them. In the context of Starshot, the photonic crystals, well, in the context of Starshot, accelerating this sail to 0.2 C, one of the things that the sail has to be good at, has to be extremely reflective, but it also has to be extremely reflective over a reasonable bandwidth of light because of the relativistic shift as its local inertial frame is moving quicker relative to the source. And so that's where certainly the work that's being pioneered by the folks at Delft University of Technology was very a very high interest to us in terms of the Interstellar Initiative grants, because they're trying to bring some technological solutions that would solve that problem. But in parallel, it actually also solves the areal density, or at least gets closer to the targeted performance for that. So that's narrative one. Narrative two, in terms of something moving faster, do the characteristics of it change? I mean, locally, if you've got, let's say you're sitting on the bridge of your ship and you're using your iPhone. Your iPhone's going to work just fine because you're in a local inertial frame and it's with you and you're doing your stuff. Now, in terms of one inertial frame interacting with another inertial frame, that's where you have to make sure you do the right coordinate transformations between the two when you're trying to figure out what does one see relative to the other based on whatever state they are in. Right? And so that's when that type of a question starts to have some has a reason for you to start to decode how those two things would see one another. And as evidenced by the thought process that Delft is trying to make their sail compatible with these shifts in the perceived wavelength from the sail, as its local inertial frame is slightly different.
Exactly. The laser they were proposing is from, say, Earth or, another frame of, coordinate system. But the thing they are moving close to point to see is different. Then the refractivity is also interaction of the light with the material on the surface. So the material property will remain the same and still achieve the same high refractivity, or those kind of things. That's something that is a little bit. Something maybe they maybe assume that the material property is always the same, and it's just the issue of the coordinate transformation. But maybe there's something that's maybe is a little bit unexpected.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I understand that you're trying to you mentioned this Casimir effect. I think people, I think it's try to benefit from the vacuum, to see you can manipulate it or gain some of the useful energy or propulsion from it. I think, and I think the other thing people are asking, I think that you are trying to bring very important the Venn diagram, the quantum mechanics, and general relativity. I think that's why you were talking all about this, is making a unified picture, or this resonance you're talking about. And from there, then you gain some idea that how to manipulate, those fundamental physics in the vacuum. So that we can, as you said, even marginally create some, kind of warp drive type of scenario. But before that, you have to establish, the understanding of the model, and that's what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Crawl, walk, run. Right. But the corollary is true, right? You've got to do the fundamental science work first, right? But once you get something figured out, like quantum mechanics gave us iPhones. Right?
That's right.
Our whole computational world is built around the whole principle of quantum mechanics. And then, interestingly enough, the ability for me to pull this phone out and then go figure out, I could pull up a map and figure out where I'm at to within probably, a meter accuracy, and that's due to general relativity, right? So those two fundamental models, right, work together to allow us to go navigate to some restaurant we want to go to, or some shop we want to go see that we don't know how to get to, and then those two types of deep understandings of nature work together seamlessly, and then we can go and accomplish something. And so while you might look at the talk that I gave today and say, wow, there's a lot of science in that, I don't know that I directly see some of the applications. It's really, really important for us to understand that science to be able to build the technological applications on top of it. But certainly they do have implications. So the dynamic vacuum, we think, has a lot of implications for, let me be explicit, for the idea of maybe manifesting a space drive, if you will, or maybe even manifesting something that we could try and implement in the form of a space warp. I don't know if we'll ever get to what that cute video was that I showed you, but that's a potential path based on what the mathematics requires. And so if we can increase the magnitude of negative vacuum energy density that we can generate at will by simply developing this deeper understanding of nature at the microscopic level, and that may help us understand if we can take that idea that's mathematical and show that it's not only plausible, but that it's feasible, right? So that last step is really important. So I think having the ability to having a mechanism where you can increase the magnitude of negative vacuum energy density that you would manifest because you have this next level of understanding, I think that's really important. But you got to have the science first.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I think what people were expecting was something immediately jump to occupier drive or warp drive, but there's a very big gap, how to practically generate it, and that's exactly what you are doing. And so it's actually ultra important, but I think some people miss that, so that's why I came up with those questions, EMF, basically that's what you are trying to do, that's your effort, try to build a gap as a very practical application oriented, but before you really get that, you have to have those solid theory and to understand how really to manipulate out of nothing. So that's very important. And Paul, but let me just actually, when you mentioned relativity, I think You know, when I was studying the you know, the semiconductor physics in the beginning, actually, or the solid state physics, actually a lot of you know, they use the quantum field theory to, you know, to study, you know, on those band structures, you know. So there's also, I think there are relativistic effect, you know, in those electron in those band, you know, some part. It's a very involved. I kind of forget about the detail, but I think it's the interaction. I mean, or the Venn diagram overlap you're saying actually also happen in the micro or narrow scale. In that sense, but you know how to release that type of energy, you have to, you know, figure out how the better way to unify, you know, interpret it. So I think this great. And you know, the exoplanet, you know, we have been having events exoplanet, and we also have event on Event Horizon Telescope. You know, that's because if you want to utilize this, you have to see, you know, where the wormhole black hole is and how the exoplanets. And you are right. I mean, they study this, the gravity resonance structure. You can able to predict, you know, or help the, you know, the observation of the exoplanet. Okay, Paul. So Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question, Sonny. Have you guys tried to model one of the titanates, barium titanate or zirconium titanate? The material reminds me very much of multiple Casimir cavities, and I didn't know if you guys had looked into that or not.
Not yet. No, that's a good question, Paul. But yeah, no, we have not looked at that. Yeah, I think we're trying to see if we can make these large macros by comparison. Because what you just asked was looking at, you know, individual atoms in a lattice structure, and then trying to creating those as a bunch of little microscopic.
Well, you start with the unit crystal cell and work from there. I agree.
Right. And so what we're doing is we're at you know, that might be at the 5-foot level. We're at, like, you know, 100,000 foot level. We might even be in orbit by comparison.
Okay.
And we're trying to look at a macroscopic system. I think that, you know, the thing that we're really, you know, science is always about trying to you know, predict something and then measure it in a laboratory condition to everyone's satisfaction. In other words, it's easy for somebody else to duplicate. And so I think some of these Casimir cavity experiments we're trying to do have the potential to check those boxes and allow other people to check those boxes. And then that would really give us a lot of confidence that these physics models that we're using to make these predictions, we could then use them in other ways where we start to go directly into a technological application. And how can we, you know, can we do something that's of technological interest from space exploration?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So just a question. So you mentioned about your company is projecting for the end of the century. Is that what you were saying? So do you think at which tipping point maybe, you know, some you know, people are, a lot of companies here, you know, Aerojet, Rocketdyne, Boeing, you know, their SpaceX, they're doing a lot of, you know, propulsions, you know, it's kind of, and the AIAA also have the space and the, no, propulsion and energy conference. So do you think at some point, you know, based on what you're doing, you know, what kind of, you know, the tipping point that maybe some of the company, they will spend more resources into development of this advanced propulsion?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't have an easy answer for that one. I'm trying to think about that a little bit, right? Because what confluence of events would trigger the SpaceXs of the future if all of a sudden dive into this particular domain? Because, you know, SpaceX is doing a masterful job of using chemical propulsion to go do some very interesting things and trying to improve the ability of reusing rocket hardware. But at some point, you know, what would technologically need to be true for some folks to start to do some things that would be identifiable with trying to go to, you know, take humans to Saturn or to, you know, even further out. I really have to think. I think the thing that's going to probably have to be true as trying to keep it as simple as I can. I think when we get to a point where we can generate persistent power, that's the way to say it. when we have the ability to generate non-trivial amounts of persistent power in space that don't necessarily require governments to do by themselves, that may be where that condition might be true. Right, because I think in all of my experience doing human exploration architectures with NASA, we were always in a power constrained scenario, just very, very power weak, if you will. And if you want to do humans to the outer solar system, you got to have, at a minimum, a persistent power source coupled to an electric thruster. And so that implies, you have to have the ability to generate a lot of power. And once you can do that, reliably, safely, and cheaply, whatever that might look like, I don't know. Right, I showed a nuclear reactor or a fusion reactor. Once you can do that, once an entity can do that, then you'll see, I think, a lot of people getting into that. I think that's what has to be true, is you have to have the ability to generate non-trivial amounts of persistent power and be able to launch that to orbit. And then I think you might see something like that.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's the best answer. But you probably see the reason why we have a lot of folks here, the aerospace company, and they're, as you said, they are looking for the next things, it's a big thing. And they like, crazy ideas of those things, and they are doing chemical propulsion right now. And they're thinking about some kind of nuclear thermal, electric propulsion, plasma propulsion. They were trying to think of different things. So that's why I'm saying even the scientists working on electric propulsion, they were start to think about something like quantum mechanics combination, exactly what you were saying. But they're looking for the time to jump in. A company putting resources. But you are right. But this is just a kind of upfront. And as you said, this probably will constantly adjust the time frame. But people, I think this is the point that people are very interested in. When maybe people in the future gather, or von Braun, something that will tipping things happening, and they will explode from there, something like that. But they take easy. Whenever something, have a new news, and they will be more than happy to hear from you again, for new development. This is so exciting because it's really what you are feeling is the gap. You are trying to figure out the gap, which is a very big gap. Otherwise, it's all science fiction or just there's some kind of model, but it's really how to do it. It's a very big question. Okay, so anybody any further question? So if not, let's thank you, thank Dr. White again. This is so exciting. We'll definitely ask Dr. White to come back with us. Especially it's a new development, new study, and also the scholarship. The program that is doing. They're all moving in the right direction. Very exciting. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ken, for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for attending. I hope everybody has a good weekend. Be safe.
Yeah.